We'll now call to order the special meeting agenda budget workshop on Wednesday, May 15th. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Mosby.
Present.
Councilmember Vega.
Here.
Councilmember Cordova.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Dirk Starbuck.
Present.
Mayor Janelle Osborne.
Here. If you'll please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our business tonight is review and discussion of the 2019-21 biennial budget, so I will hand it over to our city manager to begin the presentations and information for this evening.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and thank you to everybody that's in the audience for attending tonight. This is our fourth budget workshop. We had our first one last December. We had one in March, we've had one in April, and we have one tonight. At the last workshop, Council asked staff to come back with additional budget options for the Council to review. Staff's been working very hard, very diligently to come up with different versions, options, and other information for the Council. Tonight, there's going to be three options presented for the budget. The original, approximately 8% budget reduction for all general fund departments. We're going to just do a quick review of that. A council-sponsored general fund cost reduction, but with no additional revenue enhancements. And what I'm calling a city manager-sponsored general fund cost reduction, but with a possible revenue enhancement. As we walk through the presentation tonight, my staff and I are here to give our professional opinions and recommendations on what we believe to be the best path, but again, the final decision is, of course, with the City Council. The basic agenda for tonight is the following. Brad, can you just load it up there? It'll start with a review of what was presented before. That's the basic reductions. I'm going to be having it done by department head. But a request came from council to also add in there what was needed by the department. What are other things? Not the Cadillac level, not the Mercedes level, but what is an operational level of needs that the city has? And so they'll be coming up here and discussing that. We're going to then also move on. Let's see, I just lost my place here. Due to the council questions and comments that have been received by myself, as well as questions and requests for clarifications from the community, we'll start to review some of what the other cities have been doing in the Tri-Cities. We'll also be addressing council requests on what are the requirements of timing of the different types of different taxes. We actually have a matrix that breaks it down for the council and then the community members that had asked. You've both been asking me almost daily for that. So we have a handout in the back also, and it should be in your packets up on the dais. We're then going to move into some more budget information. You can never have enough budget numbers. I love numbers. Dean loves numbers. So we'll hit some new numbers that we haven't talked about yet. And finally, we'll come to the different budget options that we have available for the council to discuss. So I would like to just note again that some of these tonight's presentations designed as an educational format, given that I've received multitude of emails and phone calls, personal requests, and so we thought this is a good time to bring forth all of this information. So what I'd like to do first is we're going to start with the department heads, and we're going to have them come up one at a time and discuss. I'll start with the fire chief to come up, and he'll do his couple slides. So we're trying to keep everyone to a couple slides. We don't want to put anybody to sleep out here. So.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. We can put up my first slide. I would like to start off with our department mission statement. The Lompoc Fire Department is dedicated to serving the community of Lompoc by providing the highest level of emergency service and community risk reduction, safeguarding life, property, the environment, and economic vitality. Above all else, we are here to meet the needs of the public. That is our mission statement. It was a request by council to come up with some of our needs. Fire department has kind of been in the limelight in the last couple days. We've been in the paper, we've been on the news, and so you kind of know what our needs are. You know that we need a new station. We need an earthquake retrofit. That's a long-term project. That is something that's not going to be solved in this budget. Another long-term project, or long-term things that we need, is need 2 new fire engines, and we also need a ladder truck. That also is things that we just need a plan. It's a long-term project. But one of the things that we need more than anything else is to retain our rescue and our current staffing levels. The Lompoc Fire Department is very lean and efficient. There is no other fire department in the state that can supply so much service for so little a price. But if you cut us, I can guarantee we will begin to lose our well-trained and amazing firefighters. They already feel underappreciated, and our morale has hit an all-time low. Cutting staff and our ability to backfill through overtime will have some huge ramifications. We will no longer be able to participate in the statewide Master Mutual Aid Program, and as a result, we will lose revenue. In the last 4 years, we billed and reimbursed for over $2 million. That will be gone. We also will lose valuable experience and training. The other effect is if we will be forced to cut any staffing or limit our overtime to basically nil, we will be forced to brown out the rescue. Every time there is a vacancy from vacation, sick day, or injury, we will be browning out the rescue. We did a exercise about 6-7 months ago for one of our previous city managers, and in this exercise we determined that 2/3 of the time the rescue would be out of service. That's 244 days without a rescue. You know, I feel that Lompoc is kind of like the Titanic right now. We already have hit the iceberg and people are bailing off. The ship is sinking, but you, the council, have the power to save the people by throwing them a life preserver. And it's really quite simple. Give them the vote. Put it on the ballot. Let us vote on the sales tax. But if you decide to go the other way and we have to make the cuts, we're probably going to have to change our mission statement. And this is probably how it will read. We will get there when we can and do the best with what we got. Thank you. Any questions?
Councilmember Starbuck.
Chief, I have a couple of questions. I don't think it came off the dais that we were going to cut fire. So I'd like to know when, where it was told that you were going to have to make cuts.
You will see in the presentation tonight that the fire department is being asked to cut.
So you were told to do an 8.7% cut across the board then?
We will be cut. There's no other way of getting out of it.
I'm sure there's other ways, but I'm just
If you can fund us, that'll be great.
That's my point. The council
I
has
would be
done
very
no.
happy. We can do our job, we can fulfill our mission, but we need to be funded.
Well, I'm not going to go into a banter here real quickly. I just know that the council and on the dais has not said anything about cutting public safety. Part of our resolution is to not go across the board cuts, and it seems as though this is happening external of what's happening on the dais. Another comment, I've been a very big proponent for the retrofit of Station 1 through several budget cycles. I was told originally that this was going to be 3.1.
Yes.
It's at 8 million I see now.
That's,
I saw on TV the other night, there was actually a report on this. I saw what I'm going to call a hot copy. I've never received one. I don't think anybody on the dais has seen this report. And it was done in 2014.
I can't tell you, I wasn't here at the time. You'd have to
I
talk
was,
to Chief
and
Ladder.
that's why I'm making a statement about this.
It was, I'm sure he had brought it before the council at that time.
No, this has never been before. And I want to kind of stop the hysteria that's going on with public safety right now. Everybody's out here saying, we have to have a tax, we're going to cut everything. I think everybody on the dais realizes that essential services have to remain essential services. When a budget's passed, I think everybody's going to realize that, yes, there's going to have to be an augmentation of income at some kind at some point. But to run out here blindly and say, well, we need 2%, we need 1%, we need this forever. I'm trying to get to the bottom here. I think that everybody understands that we have to pass a budget that's real. And once we're done with passing the hard, ugly truth budget of where we sit right now, then we go into what are we going to do to augment. I don't think the intention is to cut public safety. I don't think it's mine. So I just want to kind of pull this out and bring it up, that not the plan.
So I realize that you were cut off and that unfortunately to reach the 3.5 million, there is unfortunately a need to look at where a cut would possibly made to public safety. And that was what you were trying to clarify, I believe, is that while none of us want to see that happen, it is unfortunately will still affect you at some level because of the size of the debt that we need to cut away at.
That is true.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Mosby.
Chief, what is your current vacancy?
We are fully staffed at this time.
Fully staffed. Okay, I just wanted, because there's been some statements going around that you guys weren't, but you're fully staffed.
We are fully staffed, but that's only been in the last 2 months.
Right. Look,
Before that, we hadn't been fully staffed for almost 4 years.
I know in the last budget cycle, we passed a budget to fully staff you guys.
And really, we just recently have had someone go out on industrial leave. So we can't even say we're fully staffed now. And the only way that we can maintain our staffing is to overtime that position.
And it's difficult to any of the positions in any, whether it's water department or whatever it is, it's very difficult to be at 100%. I think it's very few departments get to operate at 100%. I mean, it comes and goes. You don't have an alternate sitting out there, so when the guy's gone.
We only have 28 firefighters.
Right. And
It's very difficult. You could hire more, and we could eliminate overtime altogether, but the cost of running the fire department is going to double.
And that was one of the maybe 2 budget cycles ago, I think it was, we brought in an auxiliary program to help augment and to fill in.
There is a problem with the auxiliary program. They can't go into IDLH atmospheres.
Okay.
They can only go into safe atmospheres. They can't do the same things firefighters do. They can help us load hose, they can help us pick up hose, but that's all that they can do. You know, they can help us clean up around the station and help maintain equipment, but they can't fight fire.
But it's also a good pool to have available, right?
It's a very good pool to hire from. The 2 people we hired came from our auxiliary, so we got a chance to look at them and see what type of workers they are, and they're awesome. They do a great job, and that's what the auxiliary is good for. But you cannot augment the manpower with that.
They can help you with a lot of light duty.
They can help you with a lot of stuff, but they aren't firefighters.
Sure, I got you. The other thing I was going to ask over the last 3 budget cycles, how many fire positions have we added, created new?
The last time they added any firefighters was in 2015 or 14 when the rescue came online.
And how many did we bring on?
And that was, I believe, a total of 6 firefighters.
Right.
But some of them were already here. We just filled those, and that was filled with the SAFER grant. And I spoke about that on the last budget cycle, or the last budget meeting, I mean.
So what I'm getting at is that, the council has, in the recent times, increased staffing to the fire department. And
Yes, we have, but that is something that has been in the works for some time. The last 3 master plans said we needed these people.
I agree, and I have no intention of touching.
And everything that I have been hearing and I have been seeing is the fire, in order to make these cuts, in order to balance our budget, everyone's going to have to give a little. We don't have anything to give. We are so lean now that we can just do our job. If you take one person away, we won't be able to fill our mission. We'll be doing what I just said, that we'll get there when we can and do what we can do with what we got.
Yeah, and Chief, I understand your passion and I appreciate your passion, but I think that's a little large of a step, because I know that the firefighters prior to rescuing being added did a fabulous job in this town.
They
So you're
did.
kind of discrediting what they did
No,
for
I'm not.
decades. I just want to state that.
No, I'm not, because back then, we were running 1,200 calls a year. We're running 4,200 calls a year.
And I know we
It's
had,
a big difference. The
And I know
world has
there's-
changed. We should actually be increasing our manpower, not decreasing it. We need a third station. We don't need cuts. I mean, we are at that position, at that point, that we need a third station.
I mean, I don't, if you want to debate that, we can, but that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is the council has increased staffing levels, we've increased funding, and we plan on keeping what we're doing. We've offered to do other mechanisms to help reduce some of the call numbers. I know we've had people who have taken advantage of the 911 fire calls. We've had some people call them repeat offenders or whatever that, I think we had one lady over 150 times called in 1 year. So we've had mechanisms we've offered to help reduce a component of that. And I know when you have 5 or 6 people calling the fire department 150 times a year, it can be burdensome on the department. Not saying that you guys aren't busy because things are different. I mean, fortunately for the riverbed, we've helped out significantly there. I don't think you've been down there very
We have a
often.
fire right now in the riverbed, by the way.
Well, but not like we were last year, right?
It has slowed down.
Yeah.
But that's another part of this whole budget thing. If we can't keep an officer in the riverbed, those calls are going to go back up. They're already repopulating.
No, I got you. I understand.
And, I appreciate the fact that you want to keep us whole. And I hope that's what your intent is, and that behind closed doors, we're not making some other type of arrangements.
No, I don't think anybody's been behind closed doors. I mean, I've been pretty forward with my discussions on what we need to wrap up and figure out so that we don't end up in positions like this. But nobody's up here on the dais, nobody's asked for across-the-board percentage cuts. And I haven't heard anybody say defund any of your positions. Right?
Thank you, Chief Curris. I believe that even those individuals that may be the 5 or 6 that call 100, 200 times, that's that 151st or that 201st time that could be the actual emergency that they need you. And so it's important to respond to every call, even if they are a larger burden. So I appreciate the fact that your entire team gets that and treats them the same way every time they arrive and knows that that could be the moment they're needed. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to ask Captain Martin to come up.
I have a question, Chanel.
Councilmember Vega, sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the city manager, at what point in this agenda will we be actually seeing the numbers and getting to that point? It seems to me that during these council meetings, we're starting over each time, and I get it for public comment, and it's good to hear from the department heads, but it seems like We've gone through this before, so I think that maybe if we could get right to the numbers and then have staff available for questions, I think it would be more meaningful before we lose anybody.
Some of these are council requests, so
I got you, but it seems like a repeat. I think we're already ahead of the game. We have plenty of information. We have department heads that are available for questions, but it seems like we're doing the same
and
same dance.
I do agree on some of that. I'm just saying that these are requests that came when I left the council the last time. I said, please send me ideas and requests, and so we're following what I was directed to by the different.
I just wanted to ask, because it seems if we're going to come to a business decision and use numbers, you mentioned that you have 4 financial managers here. Why don't we do it like that? I mean, really, like we're balancing our checkbook instead of on the emotional end. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Councilman Vega. I do know that I'm part of the one that asked to have staff return with needs, given the last presentation was nothing but cuts. So it is information that I contributed to as part of what I'd like to see at the next budget discussion. So I appreciate your concern, but I think it's just as important to understand what the cuts are and what the needs are. Councilmember Mosby.
Yeah, Councilmember Vega, I'll echo what you're saying there, because I think it's a lot of what we're getting is the same push and movement. And I believe that we could spend an hour or two going over the slideshow here. But I believe our request was to come back with a budget, not predicated on the passage of taxes. Understanding there are some hands that need to come, but you need to get a budget solid. Because if you don't do it, and you do it on a tax measure, it doesn't pass, where are you going to be then? In our discussion, I believe we challenged the city manager to come back. And I think if you look at page, that's third from the end, you got option 2 and option 3. I think if we took that as a formula, you would see that we could do what we asked to be done. And I don't know if you identified which ones were council requests that you wanted to come back with on that, but I do believe we're getting a lot of the same presentation coming forward that quite possibly we don't need to go through if we're not looking at doing that.
I would say this first part was a request from council, so I added that in there if you don't want to see that. That's the only part that's a revisit of things that we have done, so we could, if that's a council.
I would actually like us to be respectful of the staff bringing back the presentation based on the end of the last meeting. We left it open that each of the council member would come to you, provide requests of cuts we'd like to see and additional information we'd like to see brought back so we can make a better and healthier decision regarding this issue. And I think that just because 1 or 2 council members are upset that they aren't seeing exactly what they want to see in the moment is disrespectful to the rest of us who did come forward and provide requests. So I would ask fellow council members to be patient, take in the new additional information, and let this conversation move forward so that we all can have the same information that maybe some of us already wanted the community to know and hadn't had a chance to discuss, or discovered as we were doing our own homework and thought maybe the rest of us could benefit from knowing that. Councilmember Cordova.
I agree. I think that we do have to be respectful of the time of our staff. I don't think that what we're asking them here is to replay what they brought to us last time. I think that what they were tasked with was realizing that they have a potential cut in front of them and telling us what their absolute needs are, hopefully, so that we can better understand that department. So I agree. I think that we owe them at least the respect to listen and understand what their needs are.
Thank you. Councilmember Mosby.
Can you tell me which part of the presentation you're talking about coming forward?
The rest of the presentation. There
So
are
the rest
several
of it.
parts of it that I asked for questions about, and it has been incorporated throughout the presentation.
I see a lot of my questions aren't in here, so I don't see how any one council person could direct a component that way. I was always told you needed a total of 3, but seems like there's things
As these came in, they were added to it.
And for a refresher, I will ask our city attorney to clarify that at the end of the last budget discussion, we agreed that each of us would bring our concerns, contributions, and requests for the next budget discussion directly to Mr. Troop without it being a majority. I specifically remember asking that question of did we need to have the discussion and the requests on the specifics, or could each of us bring back, and it was agreed upon that we could bring individual requests to the city manager?
That is what was decided at the last meeting, Mayor. When the city manager receives those individual requests from individual council members in one-on-one communications, the city manager then decides what to present to the council.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion. I hope that provides some clarity to how we're moving forward this evening, and I will return the floor to you, Captain Martin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Council, Mayor, public. Chief Mariani had a previous engagement in Sacramento with the leadership there, so he couldn't be here tonight and asked me to step in. Here's what we were asked to present. So an 8% reduction in our budget equates to about $809,000. So what we're asking for is staffing to remain at 44 sworn police officers, which was our 2017-2019 requirement. Currently, staffing-wise, we're funded for 44 with the 3 frozen positions for a total of 47. We've had 1 officer resign to follow a college future. We've had a recent retirement, our canine officer, and we have an officer getting ready to leave us for Santa Maria PD with another one pending. So we also have 2 on temporary disability and 1 on loan to the dispatch center. So currently, if I needed to put all of my officers out on the streets, I would only have 37 that would fit that requirement for us to be able to go out and deal with something major. So obviously our biggest request is officers. That's what we need. That's what the community needs. And you all know that, so I'm not going to take that any further. In this request, what we're asking for are replacement of 6 marked patrol vehicles. Our current mileage on most of our vehicles is sitting at over 102,000 miles. As everyone can imagine in here, those cars are driven pretty hard, so they don't last too much longer. So we'd really like to see some of that replaced. The department is in need of a 2-factor authentication to be compliant with the Department of Justice for security based on the computer systems that we have in the station. Total cost on that is about $32,000.
What is that?
So basically what that is that could be a pass, an electronic key that you throw to the sensor, and then maybe a thumbprint. It requires 2 levels of authentication to be able to come into the building so that you are who you say you are. That's a requirement by the state of California to be compliant with that. Our biggest concern is obviously, much like the fire chief said, is making sure that we can keep people here. We've seen these numbers, you know where we're at. I'll leave it for you to ask any questions.
Councilmember Mosby.
I know in this current budget cycle, you authorized 4 vehicles, but I understand you didn't receive them. Do you know any reason why?
I don't. I wasn't privy to that, being new to the captain's role and not having that information. I don't know where that was left at.
Yeah, we need maybe get to the bottom of that. I know budgets got tight, but I know that council, when we went through the fleet acquisition list, you had 4 vehicles on there. And then I found out that you weren't getting them. It's like, no. And we try to do what we can up here. Do you know what would it take for you right now? I mean, if you're authorized, as you are currently, to have 44 sworn officers and you have a few things traveling through, does it help to have, I know years ago they used to have a type of auxiliary program at PD. Do you have something like that you could establish a pool to help pick from?
It's really difficult to do today with the challenges facing law enforcement today. It's almost 30 years in this career. I've seen it swing back and forth, and right now, to ask somebody to do what we do for free is probably nearly impossible. Not only do they have to go through the same academy, fulfill the same requirements, qualify, have the same physical abilities, and do all the same job that I do, but you're asking them to do it for free. and that can be a challenge. So I don't see that being something that would really work for us in the near future. As we've heard in the past, if we're doing a test June 1st for entry-level police officer. We probably won't see those police officers if we hire them, they make it through the background process, go through the academy. We'll get them into the January academy. We probably wouldn't see them until November or December to actually be out there on the street. So if you try to apply that same thing to somebody who's a volunteer, you're not going to find a whole lot of people that want to do that.
And that's one of the complications too, as well, is how do we get to maintain it, like all the departments at 100%? Because very often you have, just with natural movement, people I think stay for about 7 years. So you got about 3 people just in flux moving at any given year. So it's difficult to stay at 100%. Do you have any?
It has been traditionally nearly impossible for this agency to stay at 100%. Not because of leadership or philosophy of the department, but because of what happens with other agencies surrounding this. And I'll be honest with you, I was one of those guys back in 2003. I left this agency and went to the Santa Maria Police Department. And it was about money and benefits. And we're at that point again. We just heard today from the POA president at Santa Maria Police Department. I know you guys hear that all the time. They're looking at a 17% pay increase over 3 years. So you take our agency that rolls on about 40,000 calls a year. There's 14 police officers assigned to patrol that handle those calls. That's almost 3,000 calls individually each one of those officers will handle in 1 year. You get Santa Maria Police Department numbers at 88,000 calls annually amongst 63 officers assigned to patrol, and they're handling about 1,500 calls a year per officer. So what you're saying is, I would love to keep my officers here as the fire chief would love to keep his firefighters here. How do I do that, guys? How do I keep an officer here that is making 17% less or more than a Santa Maria officer and working less? Do you follow me on that? They're making more money and working less. So we do everything we can to try and keep them here. And you guys have great officers here. This community is lucky to have so many locally grown officers that stay here because they love this community. And that's what we look for. That's what we try to keep here. But at some point, I was one of them, that carrot gets dangled and you take a bite. So that's our challenge.
So I was reading through Santa Maria's budget book and then Santa Barbara's budget book, and I noticed something that Santa Barbara had, and I brought it up to the city manager as well. They have a first-time homebuyer assistance program. Would that be something that could help, to retain people? I mean, you get some skin in the game that way.
I would hope
their
so.
Feet on the ground.
I would hope so, but at the same time, some of our entry-level officers qualify for meal assistance in the school district with the salaries that they make. So how do they have enough money to actually buy the house?
And that's what the assistance program
Right.
does. It helps them to qualify.
We'll take anything we can get, anything to help keep officers here. It's a
Or
great
maybe
idea.
that's something the city manager can investigate because it could help retain. And it maybe doesn't have to just be first time. It could be, second or third time to help out to keep them. And it's something that it's an investment. Santa Barbara's very creative with how they do it. They qualify them down there up to $1.25 million house.
Well, you have to
Down there,
consider
which-
Santa Barbara properties, so.
Right, and it's very difficult for Santa Barbara. Last year, about this time, they had, I think it was 16 vacant positions in Santa Barbara PD. And it's difficult, there's no doubt.
Yeah, historically, Santa Barbara's really hard. Most of the officers don't live in Santa Barbara. They either live in our community or they live in the Ventura area.
But thank you for what you do.
Captain Martin, given if you're at your full 44, does that allow you to be proactive with the specialty teams for narcotics, gangs, and ultimately the need to have a full homeless team?
Not a full homeless. What we're running on right now is what we've called a hybrid proactive teams. We have 2 proactive forces in the department right now. One, I'll be honest with you, one was a homeless. Officer Calderon as of this weekend, is rotating back to patrol because of the losses that we're seeing on the patrol level. So our homeless officer is back to patrol now. I'm also losing one of our street crimes unit who currently work gangs and narcotics to patrol to help staff there as well. So I have 2 officers that are going to be working gang problems in the community and whatever else we need. The 44 keeps us in that hybrid state. What we'd really like to see is the 47, because then we can have fully staffed 4-person team in the gang and narcotics unit, and keep our homeless officer out there, and maybe even add an additional person. Because the last thing we need to do is be sending a single officer down in the riverbed, and we are seeing the repopulation of it.
And that would be my next question. What would you like, knowing the homeless issue, knowing what we invested in to clean up the riverbed, try and maintain it, and seeing what's returning, what kind of team would you like to have in order to address that situation so we could be proactive and refrain from necessarily having to spend $500,000 every year?
There's safety in numbers. So anytime we're going out to deal with things, it's always best to have 2 to 4 officers that are dealing in that detail or working that detail. Okay. In the best case scenario, we'd have 4 officers dealing with the homeless problem. We'd have 4 officers dealing with gang and an additional 4 dealing with narcotics. We don't live in that world today, and we know that. So we're dealing with hybrid teams.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Captain Martin? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Sarah Blyle, our library director.
Hello. Oh, I have the clicker. Sorry. Okay, there we go. So for the library, we looked at the 8.7% budget cut to the library and the things that that would mean. And just a quick recap before I move on to our needs, we'd have to eliminate our volunteer program for those learning to read in English. These are members of our community that already speak English, but they lack reading skills and are unable to do things like read a prescription or take a driver's test so they can get a license. We'd also need to close the library on Monday. We have about 650 people that use the library every day, and probably 200 of those are everyday users. So those are people that rely on us to be open every single day to use our computers. A lot of the kids have told us that they do not feel safe in their neighborhoods, and they come to the library until mom or dad gets off work, so they have a safe place to be. So closing on Mondays would also take that safety net away from the kids that need it the most. And then, of course, some laying off of hourly staff. And the things that we really are in need of at this time is our programs continue to go really, really big. Interesting fact is a lot of times our programs are better attended than Santa Maria Library. We have more kids that participate in our summer reading program. I like to rub it into them every single year that we are smaller, but we are mightier. And so, of course, we can always stand a little bit more programming money to keep those kids involved all summer long. We need an additional book return box, which is about $5,000. Our computers, we do not have them currently on a replacement schedule, so what happens is when one dies, we try to find the money to pay for one. It would be great if we could replace them all. Our book and audiovisual material budget is very, very low for how much circulation we see. And part of being part of the Black Gold Consortium, where we're part of the library system from Paso all the way down to Santa Paula, and we share materials. But our book budget is quite behind everybody else they require, and that might be something that we need to increase in order to keep our membership there. Currently, our book budget hasn't changed in about 20 years, so things were a little bit cheaper 20 years ago, so we could definitely use help in that area. Our self-checkout kiosks and security gates, they're about 8 years old now. The average lifespan is between 5 and 7, so we are managing to keep them running at this time, but that's something that we need to obviously keep in mind for the future. And we would love to have more open hours. It's something that people ask for all the time, but of course that would require additional staff. So those are the things that we're in need of at this time. I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions for the library? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Then we'll move over to Public Works with Mike Luther.
Good evening, Mike Luther, Public Works Director. I just wanted to, so in Public Works, as you know, the key department or division in Public Works that is general fund affected is Parks Maintenance. So our current staffing, as you can see here, is we're down 4 3/4 positions. So we have a total of 5 field positions to do field maintenance. And our 3 critical needs, I guess, would be, the first one would be to fill the 3 vacant budgeted positions. Those currently aren't held, but that is our need. We need to get those back up so that we can maintain minimum levels of service in the park for maintenance. We have a real critical need for playground equipment replacement repairs. So there's more needs than kind of shown here, but over the next 2 years, we estimate about $180,000 critical playground need for replacements and upgrades. We have a need for various roof repairs. And for restrooms at several parks and ball fields. Staff has estimated that need to be about $75,000 over the 2-year budget. And there's also a need to remove dead or dying trees in various parks. I think we've estimated there's at least 20 trees that need to be removed over the next 2 years, and that's estimated at about $60,000 need. Is there any questions on park maintenance?
Councilmember Mosby.
Yes, I know at the council meeting, we had Mario Guerra get up and speak about Prop 68 grants. Would those help out in the park components of maintenance that you're looking at?
They could possibly help out. There's, as you know, there's no guarantee on a grant, so I mean, I wouldn't bank on it. One of the critical needs is at Beatty Park for their playground. That's not even eligible for the grant. I mean, it might be eligible for some of the earmarked portion that I believe.
I think you had 5 parks that did qualify, and I think it was up to $8.5 million per park potentially, right?
That's the maximum, yeah.
Right.
Maximum.
So, just saying that there are potentials out there as well that could.
Oh yeah, we definitely are pursuing grant opportunities.
I think you guys are working on 2 of them currently right now, right?
Yeah, so they had the Parks and Recreation Committee meeting last night. We talked about applying for grants for JM Park and Pioneer Park.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions regarding the Parks Department? Okay.
And then, so the other general fund divisions in Public Works are engineering, streets, urban forestry. This is just the same slide that was at the last meeting. I just wanted to point out that those are 97% funded by non-general fund funds, and the 3% that's currently budgeted is a requirement so that you can receive the other non-general fund. So that's your maintenance of effort requirement. And if there's any questions on those, I'd be happy to answer those.
Councilmember Mosby.
And do you also have the enterprise reimbursement for roads?
That is not on there, no.
So that's another, was it $1 million, I think, in account?
I would defer to Dean Albo for that.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's something else that we have out there. And how much comes in every year, or is being billed out every year for that?
We get approximately $600,000 a year, but that can,
Okay,
change depending on what we need to use that money for.
right.
Councilmember Cordova.
In the positions that you've identified as having vacancies that are budgeted for, why haven't those positions been filled? Or the positions that are in the next slide for the engineering, streets, and urban forestry that aren't coming out of?
Those have been held to save on road funds so that we could actually save up enough money to do some capital improvement projects. At the rate we were, before SB1 passed, we were on the gas tax funds were reducing and costs were increasing, so we were actually heading towards to where we're basically going to barely make payments for staff salaries and benefits. So the decision was made to hold those temporarily on purpose so that we didn't deplete all the road funds and wouldn't be able to do any capital projects. With the passage of SB1, there's the possibility that some of those could be refilled.
Thank you. Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, Mr. Luther, kind of going along the same line with urban forestry. I brought it up before, but here we're saying we have diseased and dying trees at about 60,000. I understand that our urban forestry crew does considerable work for the electric enterprise. Would it make fiscal sense that we actually have a couple of dedicated urban foresters in that enterprise, and then the rest of the urban foresters wouldn't be working on electrical line clearing, but could work on these remove the dead and dying tree type of thing? Or is it just too much to split them up?
Well, the problem with using urban forestry in the parks is they're not related to the roads. So, I mean, we could use urban foresters to remove park trees, but Parks has to pay for them. Parks doesn't have the funding to hire them to pay for them. I mean, I guess that's the dilemma they're in. When urban forestry does work for electric, your example for electric, through the work order system, electric pays for their time to do that. So at current, I mean, we could do that, but we'd have to add staff.
Right, but it would be dedicated staff for electric and dedicated staff for urban forestry.
Well, I don't think there's enough dedicated work to do two full-time employees for electric solely.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Luther? Thank you.
So I'm wearing my second hat for only another couple days, luckily. We did hire a new community development director, so she'll be starting on Monday. These were just the reductions that were talked about last time, just smaller amounts in the building, planning, and recreation division. What I want to really look at is the building division, the needs they have there. Right now we use contractual labor for both the building inspector and a plan checker that we had to bring in when one of our staff was out on a medical issue. And the cost to bring in just a building inspector, we're now having to share them not just with the city of Lompoc, we share them with the same person with Buellton, Solvang, and now Goleta. So it's you get a couple hours and you get a couple hours, and you know, so we don't get through all of the inspections that we should be getting through. We don't have people out there, ensuring everything's done in a proper manner because we just don't have enough time from this one person who's now being shared with 1, 2, 3, 4 cities. The other one is the plan checker. So if our building official goes out because we don't have an inspector that day, or they're only here for 3 hours, he has to go out, no one's doing any plan checking. So we're leaving a lot of money on the table on plans and permit fees that are coming in. And the cost for these two, it's much, much higher. So for the one contractual building inspector, you could, even with all the benefit payments, fully weighted, you could still hire probably 2 building inspectors for what we're paying for the one contractual and get not 24/7, but 5 days a week service, 8 hours a day, rather than a couple hours here and there. So same thing with the plan checker. We have, actually, people may not notice or understand, we have a lot of plans back there to be checked. There is a lot of construction going on. We're adding, I think the last number that I was told by building was $50 or $60 million more in assessed valuation is going in just in the first 6 or 8 months of the year we're going to be looking at. So that's a large number to try and keep up with. So that was the needs for that area.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, well, Mr. Troop, aren't most of these salaries paid through fees and not the general fund? They're paid by the people that use the services of building and plan check and not the general fund?
The intent is 100% cost recovery, but some of our fees are not up to where they should be. And plus, when we do the inspections, like the building inspector goes out, their cost to us far surpasses the fee that's been adopted. So that's the problem we have, is trying to get the fees up to, so if we continued, say, with a contractual, we would need to come back and push those fees up to meet, the permit fees up to meet that need.
Councilmember Mosby.
Isn't the lack of development have a big portion of that too?
Say
The lack of development, the fact that we had almost no housing going on? As far as collecting of inspection fees and such, if there's nobody doing things, I know, maybe Mr. Albro could help me, but a couple of years ago, we had a $500,000 a year loss in that area. Is that correct?
That's correct, and we've done a lot of things to change the way that we're charging for those services. We did a user fee study. We also worked on the valuation, and last year it was much better. We started, and we lost that. It was around 35% cost recovery. Last year we were at 59, and we're still working on trying to get that. I think we'll be much higher this year, and we're trying to get that to 100%.
We actually have some development going on, which helps out significantly.
And a lot of the structure of the user fees, and we had to work and fine tune it. We were coming off a contract, service, so we didn't have any, history to base that on. So we are starting to have history, and we're starting to figure out what we need to do to make that 100% cost recovery.
And I think you've tuned that department up significantly in the last couple of years, right?
I'm sorry?
You've tuned it up quite a bit?
Yeah, and our building inspector's done a good job trying to be cognizant of those factors.
Yeah.
And one more on that too is a follow-up. So the building officials looked at things. So if someone comes in and says, here's my $50,000 in tenant improvements, they go out to do the review, and I'm not being, no hyperbole, it'll be a $400,000+ improvement. It's like, oh, hold on a minute, that's completely different. So not only is it a lower permit fee, but that also impacts property taxes going forward, because what we send to the assessor, if that only raised the assessed value $50,000 versus $400,000, then for perpetuity or more or whatever, it'll impact our property tax values too.
Councilmember Cordova.
I just want to say that it's not business friendly when we pass on fees to any kind of developer coming into this community. I mean, we talk about being business friendly, but at the same time, if we're contracting work and it costs us twice the amount of what it would cost for us to have employees of our own doing the job, aside from the fact that, and to say that, we're going to pass that on to the developer, well, that's not business friendly. When we could do it more efficiently and quicker, which is the second part of that, is the time frame. Developers don't want to be waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to get response on each stage of their development. So that's something for us to keep in mind.
Any other questions regarding community development budget concerns? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so next up, since I'm here, we're going to be moving over to Jasmine, who's going to be doing some more of the update and education.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Jasmine McGinty, and today I'm going to be just giving an informational overview about sales tax rates in the Central Coast area, kind of looking at some cities around us on what they've been doing as they face similar challenges to us. So the first slide here is just showing the sales tax revenues on a per capita basis for Central Coast cities. It's a little hard to see, I apologize, but if you can see Lompoc, this red line here, that's where we stand on a per capita basis. So the graph kind of speaks for itself, but this is just what we're looking at in terms of sales tax revenues. So where we currently stand, our current sales tax rate is at 7.75%. This slide just shows a breakdown of what the city of Lompoc actually gets from that 7.75%. The state of California and Santa Barbara County in combination takes about 6.75%, and we get about 1%. If you're interested in looking at the breakdown of what the state and county get. There are some handouts in the back. Let's see what they're called. The sales and use tax highlights from Santa Barbara County, and that kind of breaks down that 6.75% if you're interested in that breakdown. So just kind of looking at a couple other cities around us, see how they have handled their budget challenges. City of Santa Barbara has recently adopted a sales tax. Their current rate is 8.75%. Again, California State and Santa Barbara County in conjunction take about 6.75%, whereas the City of Santa Barbara gets 2% of that back. So they did the Measure C sales tax, and in that, their sales tax increased from 7.75 to 8.75. That passed with 56.2%. So this one has been in effect since April 2018 with no sunset, and they kind of entitled their sales tax to Santa Barbara Critical Infrastructure and Essential Community Services. So what did they do when they were looking at adopting a tax potentially? They did community polling. So they used an outside agency, Fairbanks, Maslin, Mullen, Metz, and Associates. I apologize if I said any of those wrong. But to gauge the public interest in new revenue sources. So of the 799 surveys that were completed, 64% supported a 1-cent general purpose sales tax. Support declined with a 20-year sunset on the sunset clause. So they did decide to adopt this tax as a measure that is ended until it's ended by voters. So one thing they did when looking at this tax was they created a Citizens Oversight Committee. That committee reviews annual accountability performance report and status of revenues received and projects funded. So the Measure C ordinance requires that committee to meet 2 times per fiscal year, and those reports are available online at the City of Santa Barbara website. So they kind of keep it very transparent with how they're looking at their funds. So what did Measure C for Santa Barbara is used for? So they, like I said, they used it mainly for critical infrastructure needs and to maintain those essential services. I just listed a couple examples of approved projects that are listed on their website here. Police station renovation, stormwater facilities improvements, and all of these are available on the City of Santa Barbara website. They do list their approved projects, projects in progress, and completed projects. So they keep it very transparent to show the progress on those projects that are happening with the Measure C funding. They also are looking to use those funds for fire stations, public safety infrastructure, parks and youth programs, retaining local business, etc. So another city that is near us that has decided to go this route to address their challenges is the City of Santa Maria, more recently than Santa Barbara. Their current sales tax rate is 8.75%. Again, as you see here, the state and the county take about 6.75%. The breakdown, again, like I said, are in those packets in the back. City of Santa Maria thus gets 2% of that to use for their city general funding. So Measure U sales tax. So this one was a little different. They actually had a sales tax back in June 2012 was when it first started, and that was about a 64% support for a 1/4-cent general transactions and use tax. This one had a sunset on it, so in November 2018, they decided to extend and enhance Measure U to keep those city services maintained. That passed with a majority of 74.8%. And with that extension, the sales tax rate increased from 8.75, effective April of this year, so very recent, with no expiration. They decided to go no sunset on that tax. So what did City of Santa Maria do when they were looking at implementing a tax potentially, looking at their options? They also did a community survey, to kind of find out what services to prioritize with their cities. Across the board, they visited about 32 different community groups, and about 71% of respondents decided they wanted more police officers. 50% wanted safe space for teens, maintaining 911 medical response times, and different types of programs. So while Santa Barbara, our neighbor on one hand, decided to focus on critical infrastructure and those services, Santa Maria decided to look at public safety as their priority for their sales tax. So what are they looking to use those funds for? Like I said, public safety was their main priority, neighborhood police patrols, fire protection, firefighters at Station 5, better emergency responses. Just for an example, from the year 2017 to 2018 fiscal year, the previous Measure U that was adopted in 2012, 91% of those funds were used for public safety services, and 9% of those funds were used for library hours expansion, graffiti removal, and code compliance. So with the new tax, they're estimating to bring about $18 million in per year. Another example we have from the Tri-Counties is Carpinteria, who also recently adopted their sales tax in the November 2018 ballot. So that brought their sales tax up to 9%. So a little bit higher. Again, state and county take about 6.75, and the city of Carpinteria then gets 2.25 of that. So their increase, like I said, was a little higher. It was about 1.25 sales tax, an increase from 7.75 to 9%. Effective April 1st, also with no expiration. So they decided not to do a sunset on this one. So when they were looking at their sales tax options, they also used an outside agency to conduct a survey for their community. They used the same firm as Santa Barbara, which I listed on there as well, to kind of gauge the interest on sales tax for the community. Of the 414 interviews that were conducted with the residents, 65% of respondents supported the 1.25 increase. 38%, it's a little hard to read, so I'm just going to read it real quick. 38% said definitely yes in support of that ballot measure, 20% said probably yes, and only 6% were undecided but leaning towards yes. So once that was adopted, they're kind of a hybrid between Santa Barbara and Santa Maria. They decided to use it on general services such as disaster preparedness and response, street repair and maintenance. But they do also, in their wish list, essentially, they're looking at maintenance and repair, park maintenance, public health and safety, addressing homelessness, etc. So that is for the Tri-County. Those are some cities around us that have gone this route. So now we're just going to look at a few other cities outside of the county, but that have also looked at sales tax. So City of Pasadena, they just recently passed the sales tax, and it is now at 10.25. So it's pretty high. LA County takes a little bit more, and the state, so they take about 8.5, and the City of Pasadena is left with 1.75. So when they looked at their Measure I, their increase was about a 3/4 cent increase from 9.5 to 10.25. Effective this year with no expiration, decided on no sunset, they're estimating about $21 million in revenue beginning July 1st. So when they were looking at this, 69% voted yes in support of this increase. So what did Pasadena do? Similar to the cities around us, they had an online survey and they held a meeting series called Join the Conversation. So they were very open and transparent and held many presentations to community groups to gauge their interest to see what they wanted. In taking that online survey, the results in order of importance, their first thing that they found that their community was looking for was maintaining 911 services and maintaining fire services. So public safety was very important to the citizens of Pasadena, similar to Santa Maria. Here's just an example of their wish list and what they're looking to use Measure I for, maintaining those essential services, fire, police, response times, but also addressing homelessness, maintaining youth and senior services. Just a couple examples here of what they're looking to do, project specific. They want to replace 17,000 older streetlights, replace obsolete 911 infrastructure, etc., with those funds. The last city I want to talk about tonight is the city of Palm Springs. The reason why I wanted to just briefly touch upon them is because they have a very similar population to us. So their population in 2017 was about 48,000. We're about 44,000, so roughly the same in size. And when they adopted their sales tax increase, it was about a 0.5 cent increase from 8.75 to 9.25. This went into effect April 2018. Again, with no sunset, they decided no expiration. 56% voted yes in support of this increase, and they're expecting to bring about $7 million per year. So what did they do when they were looking at this sales tax? They also conducted a survey to focus on the items to include in the ballot language and how they wanted to bring that up. So they focused on promoting that money will stay local and not taken from them by the county or state. So that 1.5 here that you see out of the 9.25 will stay in Palm Springs to maintain those essential services. And here we see public safety is the main thing that they're looking to use those funds for. Rapid 911 emergency response, fire, police protection, adding paramedic services, very similar to what the other cities are looking to do with those funding. So now I just want to briefly touch upon the local revenue measure results. So these are the overall passage rates for 2018. So this is a combination of both June 2018 and November 2018 elections. So of the 185 cities that put this on the ballot, 170 passed. That's a passing of 92%. It's a little hard to see here, but there are copies of this in the back. All these cities here in the green are cities that passed the tax, and then these down here are the ones that did not. So 92%, and it's very interesting that majority voted no sunset on the tax. So that's just another note. This handout that is in the back, it is from only the November 2018 election results, but the June ones are also available online. So with that, that concludes my informational presentation about different sales tax, and it was just mainly to show you what other cities and counties are doing, or cities are doing around us to address their budget challenges. So I am open for any questions, or if not, I will turn it back over to Jim, Mr. Troop. Thank you.
Councilmember Starbuck.
I've got several questions, and I don't expect you to have this off the top of your head as knowledge, but our issue here is going to be a PERS obligation. Everything that has been shown here has been a specific tax for a specific purpose, which tells me if we did this in Lompoc, the money that we currently use for that purpose is going to have to be deferred to pay our PERS obligation. Simple math here, I'm sure. We're not going to see improvements on anything that we have. We're not going to see an increase in officers. What we would do is be able to maintain current services and pay our PERS debt. I'm going to ask about Santa Barbara. Do we know what their PERS obligation is?
Do you know?
It's a random question. I just,
They have a pretty good size. Almost every city that enacted something other than 2 at 55 or 2 at 60 has a pretty big obligation on the books.
Yeah. The curiosity here would be they passed this general tax, but where's the money ending up and how much is actually staying with what is shown here? Now, I mean, the demographic and a financial comparison between Lompoc and Santa Barbara, we know how that goes. One thing that I found interesting here was the tax seemed to go into perpetuity, that word again, and it says voters ending a tax. Well, it has to be brought up by somebody to end a tax. And how does the voters decide at one point? They go 20 years down the road, they go, I'm done paying this. So a sunset, I think, is going to be important on a tax. Their talk of citizen oversight for every tax. We'll have citizen oversight. It works good for a year, but it fails. Lompoc's failed. We have a park and pool assessment, a citizen oversight committee. Not anymore. We couldn't get anybody to volunteer for the Citizens Oversight Committee on Park and Pool. So guess who has the responsibility now? The council, the same ones that voted to do that tax. Santa Maria to 0.25. I think anybody would vote for a 0.25, but again, it was a specific tax. Obviously, there was voter confidence because they raised it by 0.75. They're given pay raises at 17%. I'd be curious what their PERS obligation is, or are they just building so rapidly and so much resale that they can afford it? Their income obviously far exceeds ours. What made us decide on 1%? Everything that I'm hearing here is 1%. We don't even have our budget here. We haven't approved a budget, so we don't know what the deficit is to go ahead and forecast what our percentage sales tax is. We can provide services. I guess what our thing is how much do we need to meet our PERS obligation so we can stay where we're at? And
Councilmember Starbuck, I appreciate all those questions, and I think we absolutely should address those when we get to the end of the rest of the presentation. I do realize that this list doesn't actually say whether or not they were all general tax or all specific, except that I do see general tax at the very top. So you didn't list any specific tax. You didn't list anything that wasn't written in a way that said it would allow a 50+1 passage.
Correct. These are all general use taxes.
Right. So that is one of the differences. I think the other, in hearing some of Councilmember Starbuck's concerns, And then hearing Mr. Albro's comment, most of the communities realize and have a very large pension obligation debt that continues to grow, but that's a very difficult discussion to have. And so if you can potentially lock down the amount that you're going to specifically dedicate to the departments that need it and know that income's coming in and it's yours. The state can't take it away, the county can't take it away. It does free up some money to proactively pay down the CalPERS as the community grows and is more successful. So I think that there is a way to explain to the community that we're not trying to bait and switch. What we're trying to do is absolutely fund the things that we know are important to the community, while at the same time tackling obligations that may not be there for forever, but tackle the things that will be there for forever with funding we know we can depend on because it's ours. Councilmember Vega.
Exactly the question I was going to ask with the CalPERS obligations, and maybe Mr. Albro or Mr. Troop can tell us exactly why the unfunded liability in other cities is being addressed differently than what we have here. This is the elephant in the room here, that I believe that we've been told that if we don't address it in the next couple of years, it's going to be insurmountable as far as the amount of interest that we're paying on that debt. So maybe you could
I think a
elaborate.
lot of cities have different strategies on how they're trying to address this. Santa Maria is trying to grow their way out of it, increase their revenue base so they can try and tackle that. And when I've looked at a lot of these cities too, they're thinking more long-term, that they want to invest in their cities, that they're trying to sell their cities. So every single city, I've looked at all these, and every single city has a different strategy what they're trying to do. And I think that they're not being able to balance their budgets, and they're just doing something about it.
Can I add real quick to that one? Yeah. Excuse me, you have other cities, and it would sure be nice to be similar to Beverly Hills. They just went over and they wrote a check and said, boom, they paid off a huge amount, but their income stream is incredible. I mean, it's like another country. If you remember the one graph up there, the problem we're really sitting here in Lompoc is our per capita income is so low compared to most everyone else's, just even in the Central Coast area. That's what happens is, if you put in a 1%, I'll just use Santa Maria, they're getting in $18, $19 million. If we put in a 1%, you're getting 5. Now there is a population difference, but when you break that down to try and equalize it, we should be getting $9 to $10 million. Our per capita is lower, and until we can get that machine going and getting our economic machine growing, that will change. But for the limited time we have right now, it's a big hit for us. So that's why, why are we doing 1%? Partly because that was my suggestion, because at a 0.5%, it's so much less. If we were Santa Maria, and I forgot who was up at the top, I think Pismo was at the top, and whoever, you wouldn't have to do a whole percent, but a 0.5% for us right now in our current economic state doesn't really drive home what we need. So that's sort of where that came about.
I think in the presentation here that shows that their sales tax that is up to 9%, I think that's a fear factor somewhere, because where do we go from this, okay? If it's not enough to take care of the existing debt that we have, and we're only really taking a bite out of it, and I understand the 1% is going to be beneficial to CalPERS if it's a specific tax in public safety, or you can put 3 things in there, but again, there's not enough revenue here, so it's being presented as a save-all, and that's not really the case. It's more of a patch, so to speak, because it's not meant, if it's a specific tax, it will not balance our budget, because it'll be designated toward a couple of other things. Now, the other question here is the information for me, I think that would help me make better decisions, is to have a presentation that shows you the difference if we were to split this in half, we were to talk about the tax, if we were going to vote on a specific tax or a general tax, figure out where we're going to go from there. Is it going to be a sunset clause? Is it going to be non-renewable? I think what we're doing is we're spinning our wheels here, because we're not able to go back and say, hey, are we only going to fund specific things, and how do we get there? So basically you cut the elephant in half, and then you go back to how we're going to balance the budget. I think that would be a better use of our time. And that way we get to actually what we're trying to do, create a budget moving forward that we can live with. Because to expect everything to be a general tax in perpetuity, I got you, Dirk, I got that in that word, okay? So anyway, I think it's kind of, for transparency reasons, I think the public would like it broken down. So I think that would help me make a better decision to have it presented like that, instead of the resistance to saying if we do anything, it's going to end up this way. If we go here with a balanced budget or a deficit budget, obviously the balanced budget is probably the smarter way to go. That's the part that everyone's has a resistance against, because what happens is if this tax, if it's a specific tax, does not pass, like in any other business, you'll have to go to Plan A, and you will have been digging your hole, paying people that you really can't afford, or making adjustments for the creation of jobs that have happened in the 15-17 budget. In a business that goes on a hypothetical like that, expecting this thing to pass and they go back, is kind of really not being transparent and being honest and forthright.
Well, Councilman Vega, I'm going to let you run for mayor in 2020 so that you can run the meetings, because you jumped ahead to exactly the kind of conversation I hoped we would have at the end of this, is to break it into parts. So I appreciate the fact that you're on board with us breaking it down into the different areas that we need to discuss so that we can have the very needed discussions with each level. And I think when we get to the end of the presentation, you'll have enough information that we can then break it down into those different levels of discussion and address them. So you're on the right track. I'm really glad to hear that that's where you want to go. And again, I'll let you have the seat in 2020 if you keep thinking this way.
Well, one more comment here is, if we have 2 or 3 more budget meetings, are we going to reset and do the same thing over again, or are we going to actually have a budget meeting and actually talk about the numbers and the ways to get there? I understand where the agenda is written to have presentation after presentation, and I get it, and I applaud the city staff for coming forward and allowing questions to be asked again. But if you're paying attention, you lose sight of where you were, because we're repeating and doing it over and over again. We understand the needs. We see it in our presentation. I think if we treat everybody with a relative level of intelligence here, we don't need to have it written. Just like me, my idea is you're reading the PowerPoint to me, but I know how to read. I get it for presentation purposes. But a lot of these presentations that are coming up are very long-winded and convoluted, which I think in the beginning you said that they were going to be short and we wouldn't be falling asleep. And I think that there's no time limit on some of these, for being that it's a repeat. Thank you.
So I will only disagree with you that I don't see this as a 100% repeat. So we'll move forward from that, and I'll give Councilmember Mosby the floor.
I'll agree with you, Councilmember Vega, so at least you got somebody else does, but.
Well, if I could mention one thing here.
You don't have the floor at the moment, so please let Councilmember Mosby have his time, and then I'll recognize you after that.
Okay, getting back to one of the questions that Councilmember Vega asked is, if we passed a budget predicated on a passage of a tax, and the tax didn't pass, where would we be?
Then we'd go back and make some very hard decisions at that point. So it's just like Councilmember Vega said, we'd have Plan B to say, here's Plan A. If it goes through, everything's good to go. If it's Plan B, because it doesn't pass, then we'd have to make those immediate decisions. That's where you're doing similar to what Santa Maria did, is you pass a deficit budget saying this is what would happen, and then if it doesn't happen, then you move to Plan B.
And I think what the council set up here is that we didn't want to get into that drastic situation. We wanted to step forward with a movement, with budget, as we asked you to bring forward, without a tax component. Mm-hmm. And then bring back, I actually made a motion to bring it back to discuss a tax measure later, because we felt that we didn't need to get into a drastic situation. We didn't want to expose ourselves. Did you, any of you happen to read the study that was done on the last tax that the city tried to pass, and to see what happened the last time?
I did not.
Okay. There was one that was out there. You should read it and see what happened. And probably 4 times now there's been tax measures, not all of them by the city, that were put on, and they didn't pass. And when you look up there and you quickly look, white communities in the communities that didn't pass them, some of them were communities similar to us that were in tough financial situations outside City Hall too. And I bring this number up a number of times, and that is the median income and what has happened in Lompoc. And we're just now recovering in the last 10 years. From what our people were making 10 years ago, we're just now finally surpassing that number again. So there's a lot of people out there that are struggling on hard fixed incomes. And when you have communities like that, tax measures are very difficult to pass. And that's why some of us up here who watched this happen in the last 10 years are trying to be more cautious about this and understanding. It's one of the things that I've kind of figured out is, and I'll ask this as a question, is so if a tax measure is passed, where does the money come from? Do the people pay more for the product, or is there just less held back for the vendor? So what do you think happens?
I guess I'm not quite understanding. You know, it's just like a regular sales tax. It's a little different, but it's similar. So
at the end of the year, do you think people end up paying more themselves? Or do you think the vendor ends up taking less, in other words, less employees, and just directs money to City Hall?
This is a sales tax.
Sure.
So if I go buy my $10 Modelo beer and it's $10, I'm going to pay 10 cents more for that beer. So.
Yeah, but the people have a finite amount of money in the city.
I'm not going to disagree with that. I think there's a lot of different things. Like my gas cost has gone up about $1 a gallon, but I still have to drive. And so to me, it comes down to how am I going to make my different choices? And am I in a different realm of salaries? Yes, absolutely, that is. But I think it all comes down to personal choices on what it is.
Well, there are components, items that are elastic or inelastic, and whether it's cigarette or alcohol or gas, people, they're addicted or have to or got to buy, they will. But when it comes to other items like going out to eat and stuff, they find out that is actually paid for by the vendor. And when the vendor has less money, he doesn't hire as many people, and other things, they don't happen. Other component...
Not on this tax. This is a
sales tax, right. But so, again, that's what ends up happening, is it comes out of the total nut, is what I'm getting at. Is there's a reduction in that amount of money. If you take $5 million out of the local economy, like we're talking of doing here, what is that going to do to the local economy? I haven't seen a single slide to tell what will happen to the local economy. Something has to happen. You don't stimulate the economy by putting a tax measure out. You aren't going to stimulate the economy by $5 million by putting a tax. The money has to come from somewhere.
I guess I go back to my gas tax, where I just paid $15 more per gallon or per tank full. That's going completely out of the city versus this is staying with us. This would be part of the city. The state can no longer take any of our funding if it's collected here in the city, unlike they do on other things. So I don't see it going out of the city. I see it actually benefiting the city.
The city hall, but what about the people out there who are employed or trying to keep a business going? The $5 million has to float from somewhere. And that's what I'm getting at. We have one side of the tax story.
3/4 of it, you have to remember, comes from other places. It's not from the people in the city proper. It comes from outside. So of the $5 million, only 1/4 is really coming from the citizens that are inside the city limits.
But if everybody has a finite amount of money to spend, and you reduce the $5 million to come to City Hall as opposed to staying in the local economy outside to hire people and to pay salaries, to give wage increases, it reduces that amount of money that can stay in the local economy. It comes back in here to City Hall. That's the complexity I'm getting at, is you show this component, but you don't show the whole side and what potential damage can happen to the local economy.
I guess Dean's going to be coming up with some more, and I think he'll have a good slide for you to see on that one. But I think I'd have to disagree that I don't see the damage that's there that you're talking about, just because it is staying within the community. It's not going up to the state or the federal government.
What do you mean staying in the local community? It comes to City Hall and then it disperses.
To do different things. In this case, we're behind the big 8 ball, right? We have a huge UAL that needs to be paid off. we should have been tackling this, years ago. I don't want to point fingers behind me. It doesn't, to the side. It's here today, so we need to look forward. So until that big 8 ball's cleared off the table, we have to do something. And the big one I see is that if we do reductions this year and we go to our next budget cycle, those reductions today carry over to the next budget. And then we have to add some more. Those carry over to the next one. So it goes on until roughly 2032. So each time we're going to be reducing and reducing and reducing, and we've been reducing since the recession. So that's where I'm getting nervous sitting here trying to see how can we continue to go forward as a city. That's my...
We have not been totally reducing since the recession. I think we created close to 17 new general fund positions.
But we're holding about 30 of them right now.
Right.
So
We normally hold about 15, so we're not too far off, but we did fill a bunch of them, so not totally, but I get you, and I'm all about supporting paying for the pension obligation. I know we need to. That's been a priority for mine to make sure that we do that. I want to make sure, and I think Mr. Albro could answer this, what the pension obligation is going to, like they mentioned Santa Barbara. What's that number getting to? I mean, I looked at their budget book, and it's going to a 1-to-1. I mean, we're going to potentially up to 72%. And Santa Barbara is going just off the charts. And Santa Maria is very similar, right?
I couldn't really state. I know that Santa Barbara, one of the things they did is as the cost went up, they pushed more cost to their employees, and that's one of the ways they've tried to combat the escalating cost.
No, and I know we need to wrap on that. I did make a motion that we bring back to this. I didn't get a follow-up on that. But understand what we asked for was to do a budget without a tax component. I know at least 3 of us said that. So we're,
And we are getting there. We just we have a couple more items to go through.
So I believe that the lack of understanding here is that when you have a sales tax, as surrounding communities have, and you gather it and it is dedicated to your community, it is not going to the state can't take it away, the county can't take it away, it is your money and it's coming back, yes, initially into City Hall, but that turns into jobs and contracts and work being done at the parks or infrastructure being built out, and that creates additional jobs and additional contracts, and that is all employment, which then leads to individuals who have money to spend, who then shop, and who potentially buy houses and create a demand to buy those houses. So ultimately, that sales tax, while we all perceive that initially all it's doing is coming into City Hall to cover the costs that we have, it ultimately still goes back into the community because it covers salaries. It covers those salaries then shopping in the community, buying houses, contributing to the local economy. And if that's thriving, as the surrounding communities are showing that they're investing in their community and improving their streets and improving their parks and paying their law enforcement and fire respectable salaries, those people can buy houses, those people can shop. So it's part of contributing back to the circle of an economy, and the more you can strive to keep the dollars local by attaching them locally, it's successful. So that's why cities that have put 1 cent sales tax on, despite it being a CalPERS issue that may have created it, they are looking at how do we use the funds to improve the community, because improving the community creates jobs, creates contracts, creates shoppers, creates home buyers, and that is then stimulating it. So, Councilmember Starbuck.
This tax is the 1% would bring, what, 5 million to the community? Why would the state have reason to take it? Wouldn't that give them about 30 million?
So the state today takes about 30 million from us. So from the community today, it takes about $36 million.
So with the 1%, what would they take?
So with the 1%, that's ours. They can't touch it.
Okay.
Councilmember Mosby.
So what you were just stating earlier is that you believe that a sales tax would actually stimulate the local economy.
Absolutely. Any further questions for Ms. McGinty? Councilmember Vega, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I lost my thought process after you told me it wasn't my turn.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So our city attorney, Jeff Malavi, is going to come up, and this was from some council requests as well as a multitude of community requests, and it's just a single slide, and it's just a matrix of all about a general tax, special tax, this tax, anything you can think of, it's there.
Mayor and members of the council, I have been requested tonight to make a presentation to the council on the different types of taxes that are available and the process to place taxes on the ballot and the votes that are required for passage of a tax if the council were to decide to go down the path to pursue that option of a tax or sales tax. And the information that I'm planning to present tonight is all in this one slide. It's a matrix that talks about the different types of taxes, and I'm going to be going through the slide. The first thing to note is that in California, we have a state constitutional requirement that states that the city council itself is not allowed to adopt a tax. The council can place a tax on the ballot, but any tax adopted at the local level has to be approved by the voters of the jurisdiction. And the type of tax determines what votes are required, both for the council to put the measure on the ballot and for the passage of the tax when it gets on the ballot. So there are two different types of taxes. We've talked about them. You council members have mentioned them tonight. But the first is a general tax, and that's described in the first two columns of this table. The second type of tax is a special tax, and that's over in the third column. A general tax is a tax that when the city receives the money from the tax, city council can choose to spend those funds however the council wishes. They are not restricted by law. This city council and future city councils can change the use and allocation of those funds at any time they wish. What the city council can do, and what a number of other cities have done with their general use taxes, is create a citizens oversight committee or an oversight committee made up of anybody. It could be the council itself, it could be any makeup that the council wishes, to ensure that the funds are used according to the city council's direction once the city council has adopted a rule or policy about how those funds are should be used. A special tax, on the other hand, is a tax where the funds from the tax are earmarked for a specific purpose in the ballot measure language, and the council does not have the power to change the use of those funds. And they are earmarked for one or more particular purposes. So, for instance, the ballot measure could say that all the money from this tax is going to be used for city parks. If that tax passed by the voters, then the city would only be able to use that money for city parks. So going back to general taxes now, the general rule about the election date for general taxes is that it always has to be at an election where city council members are on the ballot. What that means is if the council wanted to place a general tax on the ballot, that the first available date would be November 2020. That would require 4 votes of the city council to place that measure on the ballot. There is one exception to that, and that is if the council wanted to place a general tax on an election date prior to November 2020. These dates in that middle box are the dates that would be available. November 2019, March 2020, April 2020, and then May 2020 and August 2020 are dates that are available for mail-in elections only. That's where we don't have polling places. Council can call that kind of election, and it's conducted only by mail, where ballots are sent to all the registered voters in the city, and they return them by mail. To put a general tax on any election date prior to November 2020 would require a unanimous city council, 5 votes, to declare an emergency that the tax is needed to be on a date prior than November 2020. Special tax, on the other hand, can go on any election date. So I have them listed here. The soonest possible is November 2019. March 2020, April 2020, May 2020, and August 2020 are mail-ins. And then November 2020, special tax, and again, that's earmarked by law for one or more specific purposes, requires only 3 council member votes to place that on the ballot. Now, it's easier to get it on the ballot because it only requires 3 council member votes, but then when the special tax gets on the ballot, it requires a 2/3 vote of the electorate in order for a special tax to pass. Whereas general taxes require 4 or 5 votes of the council, but then only 50% plus 1 of the electorate, the electorate to pass the tax. The city clerk or the county clerk needs sufficient time to get all the paperwork prepared and to print the ballots, to prepare for the election before there's an election. And for that reason, there is a deadline for the city council to place a measure on the ballot. At least 88 days prior to the election date is when the council would need to vote to call the election and place the measure on the ballot. There's a resolution and ordinance that we adopt. We were going to place a measure on the ballot. That resolution and ordinance contains the entire language of the ballot measure, so all of the language of the law that we would be adopting and putting into our municipal code. It also contains the language that the voters will see on the ballot next to the yes, no checkboxes. We would be adopting that language in one of those resolutions. So, for instance, for a general tax, the ballot measure language generally says something like, to be used for general city purposes, including but not limited to parks, police, fire, homelessness prevention. We can word that however we'd like to word that on the ballot. For a special tax, the ballot title language generally says something like, a tax to be used only for XYZ purposes, whatever the council would like to choose if it wanted to adopt a special tax. And that action, again, has to take place at least 88 days prior to the election date. So if we were talking a November 2019 election, for instance, that'd be October, September, August. First part of August is when we would need to adopt those resolutions. Finally, the last row on this table is the cost of the election, and we've also talked about this before at council. If we have an election that is consolidated with a county election, so on the same day as a statewide election or on the same day as another county election, then that's a significantly lower cost to the city to hold the election because the county is doing a lot of the work. Whereas if we are going to hold the election on a date that the county does not already have an election, it's a significantly higher cost to the city. So we know for absolute certain that in November 2020, there's going to be a statewide election. It's going to be a presidential election that year. So that would be a consolidated election with the county. That would be a lower cost than if we were to choose something like November 2019 or March 2020, because those are, unless the county holds an election on those days, those are going to be special city elections. April 2020, I believe, is the statewide presidential primary in California in 2020, so that day...
It's actually March.
Oh, I'm sorry, so it's March is the statewide presidential primary, so that day would seem to be a consolidated one.
It's also the Santa Barbara County primary.
So this, all this information is on a handout that all of you have, and it's also on the table in the back of the room for the public. If any of you have questions, I'm available.
Councilmember Mosby.
Are there ways the public can put an item on the ballot as a tax measure?
There is. It's called the Citizen Initiative. The residents of Lompoc can gather signatures around town to place a measure on the ballot. If they achieve the required number of signatures, unfortunately I can't remember what that number is right now, but if they achieve the required number of signatures, they submit that to the city clerk. If they do so, this is not set in stone, but generally around 6 months prior to the election date, then that's the minimum amount of time that we need if we go really fast, but the sooner the better. But that is another way to, yes, to place a tax measure on the ballot.
And the city clerk calls all that information available if somebody needed to discuss it? Okay.
City clerk can provide the information, but the city clerk nor I can provide legal advice about how to do the process.
Right. Thank you.
Councilmember Vega.
Jeff, when the council voted by majority to not go with a tax at all, and instead go to a balanced budget and ask for that to be presented, when did that change, when the majority voted not to go with a tax unless it was brought back? And why is it being pushed first rather than the balanced budget first, just as Councilman Mosby has asked? And who controls that, and why is it going this direction?
I don't have the answer to that, Councilmember Vega. I know the council controls those decisions by majority vote. I'm not the one to answer that question.
Gotcha. I had to note it because by majority vote, we should be respecting that decision, and it seems like the balanced budget should have come first instead of the dance for the tax. Okay, the tax may be a necessary evil, but I think it's disrespectful of the fact that we had a majority vote and it wasn't adhered to. Instead, we get a duplicate presentation over and over again. Thank you.
For clarity, I believe the last budget presentation with the 8.75% across the board cut, we were presented with a potential balanced budget because that was the 3.5 million and would have balanced the budget. Council didn't agree with that solution and then gave new direction, which allowed us the individual opportunity to ask for what council would like to see discussed at the next budget workshop. So I believe that we then made a secondary decision that superseded not accepting the first solution of a balanced budget because there wasn't agreement on that 8.7 across the board cut. Councilmember Vega.
It sounds like that was a decision that you promoted, and you're doing this individually with the city manager, and of course probably within your realm of authority, but I don't think that was a consensus by majority.
We made a consensus majority at the last discussion that we didn't like what was presented to us, and we didn't have enough information as individuals to have a discussion on the dais, and we chose as a majority to then individually go back to the city manager and provide input we'd like to see in the next budget presentation. So I understand that you are frustrated. I understand that you feel like you're being lectured to. What I think is happening is we're getting more clarity with each presentation, and I think by the end of this evening, we should be able to move forward on several decisions. So I would hope you would respect that process.
Well, the respect goes both ways. I think you're overselling something that actually by majority should be respected, and that's my point. I think you're saying that I feel like I'm being lectured to, but it does sound like that. It sounds like every time I talk, and sometimes in your condescending tone, that sometimes you should allow me the respect because staff requires respect, so do we, especially with our time frames for speaking.
Absolutely. I'm trying to respect the honor of whose light is on and who's been recognized, and that is the flow and the control with which I have is to make sure each person gets the opportunity to speak. So I'm happy to recognize you when your light is on, but earlier, Councilmember Mosby had been given the floor, and you chose to turn your light on and interrupt without having been given the floor. So I am following proper protocol. I apologize if you feel it is disrespectful. I am trying to maintain the respect on the dais by clarifying what we have made as decisions as a group as we move along. So each time we make a new decision, it supersedes a prior decision. So I'm just helping to clarify, and if you disagree with me, it is your prerogative to state so.
I do, and it wasn't about my turn. I disagree with the presentation of overselling. I think the transparency is for the public to make their needs and wants known, and I understand there's no public comment tonight,
Absolutely, there
but
is public
I
comment.
think there's an oversell going on here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Does anyone have any questions for our legal representation? Thank you.
Thank you. So now we do move into, and we're getting there, sorry it took so long. So Dean Albro, our Management Services Director, is going to actually come up and talk some more. We have some different information on the budget, but he will also be discussing the 3 different options that you would request, or multiple requests for the options.
I promise I'll be quick. Get to the brass tacks. I don't know how many people watch the news and see that the state boasting about their $21.4 billion surplus, saying that this is the good times. I'm not quite feeling that. When I look at our budget and I see, even if you take the UA out and we got $1 million in that first year and the same in the second, I get a little concerned because we got a lot of, even if you were to remove that, we still haven't addressed our cost of living in our budget and wage, with our unions. I constantly get, requests for money to fix our capital maintenance in our building. We need a new HVAC system in the police department, and it concerns me there's no money there. And our streets and roads, I think our TDA and Measure A gave us $1 million. We do have some cost reimbursement, so hopefully we can get some roads worked on. And I'm also concerned about our fund balance being as low as it is. And of course, we know what happens when we hit that UAL in there. Getting back to that $21.4 billion, 5% to us, that's 14.9% to us, that's $5 billion. I think the boss was saying 36 million, that's just sales tax. This, when it comes to sales tax here, I'll get back to that. The city here gets 13%, and the state gets 51% to their general fund. It's even more if you count all the special project stuff they do, but we're just talking general fund to general fund. But that's not really where most of the money comes from for the state. Like I said, 36 million. I think it's closer to 70 when you start adding the personal income tax. I don't know how much people smoke and drink, but there's a lot of money that goes out of our community to the state. Matter of fact, 31% is our budget that comes out of our sales tax. So it's a big component for us, and property tax. I don't know if anyone knows, but in 2016, the state did take away 0.25% from the sales tax. I believe the council says we need to live in our means. I think maybe we need to live in our means between state and local. And my kudos to Council Member Mosby for finding where the state is hiding them in Prop 64. I know we didn't have any of those, but Prop 68 grants. If you find any more, let us know. We'd like to get that in our budget. I'm not too worried about the unemployment on a demand shift of 1%. You see that little dot right there? That's about, I'm way more concerned about them moving that minimum wage. That's going to create a lot of unemployment. Lompoc is an unskilled labor, a lot of them. And, they're talking 10% over 3 years. That's a 30% increase in wages. And that's over the whole spectrum of the market. So that concerns me a lot more than that 1% shift. Well, we know how fast we're going through money, and we'll get to the brass tacks, like I said, I promise. 545,000 is what we went through in 2018, and that was holding 19 vacancies. My guess is that's about a $1.3 million deficit in our budget. This year, I'm guessing it's around 1.5. We're holding 24, and it's still growing, and we're holding more vacancies. We're going to run out of people to hold vacancies for. But we know there's some opportunity. There's some opportunity to save some interest. And if we paid it off a little quicker, we could save up to $49 million. And like I said, it concerns me when I see that ramping up that CalPERS is proposing to us. Yeah, but I thought there was some stuff that's worthy of mentioning. The city of Lompoc was one of the first cities to actually do a reform to the pension. In 2011, they created Tier 2. That went from 2.7 at 55 to 2 at 60. They also did 3 at 55 from 3 at 50. That helped a lot. Now, for sort of the last 8 years, anybody who's been in the, who started the city has been on a pension reform. Another thing we did in 2014 is we did an active investment policy, became the council and started that. I think we made close to $3 or $4 million more than in earnings that we would have if we would have stayed on the course we were on. We also did in 2018 bond refunding for the water and wastewater. It's one of the reasons why, and it's good that no news is good news. You know, we're not talking about the utilities. You know, the utilities are healthy and strong. Could probably use a little bit more capital, you know, being replaced, but it's good. It's good that we're only on one fund. But here we are, and we're asking for direction on what you want to do from here on out. How we're going to balance this budget. The general fund is the backbone of every single fund. I can't create a budget without the general fund. Almost all the divisions get cost allocated out to them. So I'm kind of at a standstill, and I'm getting further and further behind, and I'm really concerned I'm not going to be able to get a budget book together. So the request from the council was they wanted to see what it was for the directors to take a $10,000 pay cut. It was $50,000 a year, but like the attorney said, it would prohibit their contracts, and it had to be voluntarily. We also discussed what it would look like if we use the net numbers from 2018, did it across the board. Keep in mind that's 1 year. I'm going to switch gears here in a little bit. I'm going to go to 2 years and show the options. All right. That would give us a balanced budget. So here you go is option 1. If you want to build off of any of these, we can talk and we'll try and get a budget together. Also from the council, we got a scenario of holding 3 police officers, eliminating code enforcement, eliminating economic development, eliminating the public information officer, eliminating 2 planning positions, suspending the F-step for firefighters, and cert pay, eliminating the 1 battalion chief, and reducing the roster and overtime, which gets us still a deficit. It's probably manageable through holding vacancies, but that's still a pretty big deficit for us to try and tackle. We can use that as option 2. Option 3, it was the council asked, what does administrative staff bring to the table? We're recommending that we eliminate half a position for an OSA. That would take 2 3/4 positions and make it into 1 full-time position. This helps us come into compliance with the American Care Act. Eliminating an OSA in the city hall here and migrating to sharing OSAs. Eliminating a planning position through attrition. Holding 2 police officers instead of 3 in the last budget. We think that we need to invest in that riverbed cleanup and make sure it's maintained. And we're talking about reducing the fire overtime. We have to do some adjusting, $300,000 per year. And restoring the battalion chiefs back to 3. And holding 3/4 of a ranger parks. Holding a vacant position in parks for a maintenance worker. Those are both vacant right now. And then basically trying to make up the ground by holding vacancies at the discretion of the city manager. However, we're still recommending a tax. I'm sorry. It's the best way out of this. It's the smartest money that we can do. That's all I have.
Councilmember Mosby.
One thing you kind of glossed over, which, I mean, I know you're talking tax revenue, but our general fund fortunately has the benefit to be almost 50% supported by our utilities. Is that not correct?
I'm not sure, 50%?
40 to 50%.
You talking about the obligation for the CalPERS or?
No, to support our general fund, like.
Oh, no, It depends on what section you look. A lot of them but if you're talking general government,
I'm talking about as a whole, like in example, like administration, and
Yeah,
70 to 80% of administration, unlike other communities, we get to support with.
yeah, no, it's higher than that. But if you're talking about the general government, that's like the attorney, the clerk, HR, finance, facilities, anybody that does work for the whole city. It's closer to 72% is from other funds other than the general fund. So about 28% on average is what the general fund pays. And
Yeah, which is a benefit. I think a lot of the public
it
don't
definitely
really
is.
realize that because being a full-service city, that we are paying in other ways to support, which is nice, having this city. That's kind of the economy of scale component that we have out there that is a significant benefit.
It definitely keeps the cost down, having a bigger city that has water, electric, and the whole, everything. We're a very robust city, and it does help us by economy of scale, definitely.
And we do have, through a budget, there's a specific, it used to be called a pilot money, they don't call that anymore, but it comes from the electric enterprise. How much in this budget cycle did you anticipate?
About $2 million a year. Yeah, kudos to our forefathers that decided to do electric company. And I always like to look at it as our rate of return, but I know they don't like that. But it's kind of like if you were to put all that money into Edison or PG&E, it's, those are usually high dividend stocks, so it's kind of like our dividend yield.
So is it, and then we have the enterprise reimbursement that you've got monies coming in for street maintenance, and
Yes.
I think there is a public safety component there as well, right?
Yes, there is. There's 3 components, and then there's also infrastructure or building.
Right. So, I mean, we've been very creative, and we brought in significant amount of additional revenues and also supporting revenues to the general fund over the years.
Yeah. If it wasn't for the electric, the company's, rate of return or whatever you want to call it, we would be in a lot more trouble, and we'd have a lot smaller city.
And the cost allocation plan as well, which has allowed us to basically to have our general fund almost double with all those components together. I think we could almost 10
And that's
million.
because our utilities are that big. I like to use the Treasury as an example. I mean, utility billing, that's what they do. 100% collect money for utilities, and they're a pass-through through the general fund. So sometimes it makes our general fund look bigger than it really is. That's why I always like to use the net numbers. Our net cost to the general fund is about 20 million, and our gross is closer to 33 million.
Right, exactly. So it's, our forefathers have done a lot of enhancing of the funds by investing into the other programs, whether it's water, wastewater, solid waste and stuff, which helps offset a lot of the other expenses. The other communities don't have the luxury.
That's right.
To pay, where some communities, 100% of the tax is going to pay for, like, the city managers.
And it makes it really more complicated for people to understand when there's so many intricate parts that get into there. That's why I tried to strip off all those, the cost of services, even like a building inspector goes out. I try to take all those out so we can see what the actual costs are to the general fund. And that's where I did that bar, and you could see how much, revenues came in, how much expense, and how much everything was netted out.
Right. Now, thank you. And this, I think, is what the presentation, at least 3 of us were wanting to move forward with originally. So I thank you for finally getting to this component. I think maybe Councilmember Vega's had a time to look at option 2 and option 3, and I don't know if other people as well, but I think as a menu, I think that putting the 2 together, we could probably come up with something to get us close enough to have them move forward with at least close to a balanced budget with, and as one of the items they had in here, which was hold general fund vacancies at the discretion of the city manager. And I think you already hold, just naturally anyways, you already anticipate a number.
We do budget for vacancies. It's about $500,000 a year, and it can run anywhere from 8 to 13 people, and sometimes they'll be higher, get more bigger benefit if it's, a higher cost or a higher paid position that's vacant. So yeah, we normally do, and it's normally, if you figure like 10, so for us to have 28.1, we're holding 18 more than the normal.
And it's a lot of that, if you can explain what causes a lot of that holding anyways?
Right now, we're just trying to do it to balance the budget.
Well, I mean, naturally, what do you do when you anticipate a budget? You have positions held, anticipated held. A lot of it's because it takes many times 4 to 6 months to fill a position.
Yeah, and, you know, unfortunately, some of the budgets we were keeping them balanced before is because we were losing so many of our public safety, and we've been very fortunate that we've been keeping them more fully occupied, less vacancies.
I don't know if that's something you guys would want to entertain and moving forward with, but I think we have some numbers that we can get close to tonight.
I appreciate that input. I also don't think that we can get close to a balanced budget that doesn't affect public safety. So, Councilmember Vega.
Again, I concur with you, Councilman Mosby, that option 2 and 3 are something we can work with. I just don't know what the city would do to shore up the deficit in the absence of a general tax. So if we looked at, maybe you could kind of address that again for clarity, since that's why we're here. The matter of fact, if we have a specific tax that moves forward and we deal with the elephant in the room, which is the CalPERS, and we shore up our public safety, which I think is going to be a benefit to the economics and the business community in as far as development and lowering crime, I think maybe you could kind of tell me what your scenario of where we would be and how you would approach that, because even if we went to that tax and it did not pass, I'm sure you've looked at all these scenarios to see what you would do, and I'm sure you have a plan C and D.
Yeah, well, if you look at option 3, the strategy really here is we know we have 28 positions vacant. And we know that even if you guys said, you know, we're going to do the tax, go hire them, it would take us probably 6 months for us to even try and get all those vacancies filled. And like Mosby said, we're going to normally have 10 on average. It's just from people leaving and still trying to fill them. So a lot of that holding vacancies would be, we're going to see it almost in the first year. And if we were to go through this process and we didn't get a sales tax, we know that we'd be in good condition, that we could probably still maintain something close to a balanced budget. If it doesn't, and we would be back here if not with another strategy if it didn't go through. But we know that we'd be able to make it through the first year pretty close to being balanced based upon how many vacancies we currently have.
Thank you. I think that's the clarity we were looking for in first position, to see where we would be without the sales tax, even if one moved forward, because the reality of it is to balance the budget with not hypotheticals.
We just know that we're going to need to do some cuts. We're doing everything we can by holding vacancies, and we're still not able to balance our budget. So we know that we need to do something and be prepared that the tax doesn't go through, even though I think the smart money is doing the tax.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you, Dean, for this. While I do not like affecting public safety, the option 3 does allow us to make some cuts internally, preparing for the potential of the failure of a sales tax, and yet not be so heavy-handed that we have to hand out pink slips as of July 1st. So my preference, if we were going to do any cuts to move forward to deliver direction to create a budget, would be to accept staff's recommendations on option 3 and then move forward on a discussion of what that tax measure might look like. So option 3 is painful. It's painful to almost every department in some way, including public safety, because it's holding open positions. And again, I dislike that. I want us to get fully staffed and be proactive in those. So my hope is that we would put together a tax measure that allowed us to do that, and we could revisit that after a tax measure passed. We could bring the budget back and address where we could then fully staff and
I
change
totally
things.
agree. I really think that we need to do like the other cities if we are considering a tax and poll. I mean, this is the citizens' monies that we're dealing with, and I think that their input is critical. It's their money.
Okay. Councilmember Vega.
You know, I'd like to move forward with, or at least the option of considering both option 2 and having another get-together here to see how we could best integrate it with the choices that we can, because it looks like we can either put something in or pull something out and come up with a better mix that might be more beneficial. You know, it looks like code enforcement, we have code enforcement, and that's 100% general fund correct?
That's
I
correct.
wouldn't be, looking to eliminate code enforcement, but I think that the best bang for your buck when you're looking at 28% from some of these other positions, sometimes we need to take a closer look here, and see exactly what that entails. Code enforcement as a presentation, as you did that, there wasn't anybody here that represents what code enforcement does. In fact, and what the entities and what the background is and what the intricacies are in the background of actual code enforcement, except for people that only see code enforcement as a way of being penalized or getting a ticket or a fine.
I think when we put this budget, this option together, we were trying to maintain as many of the critical services and vital services that we provide, so. Yeah.
But I think 28%, if you look at even all the 100% general funds, we should be able to look at these options, because the bang for your buck, if somebody else is affected with 28% of any kind of fund and some of the rest of it is being paid on enterprise, I think it's only fair for us to take a good hard look at this.
Unfortunately, I disagree about option 2. Option 2 is pink slips as of July 1st, and I believe that that affects morale. It affects our community and the ability to do the work that needs to be done. And I see option 2 as part of the discussion of what happens if a tax measure fails, whereas option 3 is a pretty big deep. It's 2.3 million of cost savings that allows us to get to the point to put together a proper tax measure that's respectful of what the community wants to see done with that money, and then come back with success. What can we do to improve public safety, parks, streets? But if it fails, then revisit option 2, because option 2 it's too many pink slips, and some of the jobs are needed, and we need them to be done, and we need them to be there no matter what, whether we like the position or we don't. Councilmember Starbuck.
A lot of information, and I'd like to kind of make a proposal. I'm not going to make a decision tonight on any of this, but I would like to have, after council meeting next week, time to go visit with Mr. Throop. Probably spend several hours with Mr. Albro. I know he looks forward to that. And have a few questions answered in a few different scenarios here. I mean, a balanced budget, a deficit budget, I think there should be a proposal that we bring up in a hard copy. The tax issue, nobody's disputing it. It's just the amount of tax. 1%'s been this magic number. Could it be 0.75? Do we really need 125? Nobody's taken into account inflation or any of these other things. So there needs to be a big discussion about that. The type of tax is a huge one, I think. A general tax, there's a lack of trust. A special tax spells out what we can do or what will be done with it. So, there's a lot of pros and cons, and I think all of us need to take a little time and maybe bother Mr. Albro for hours while he tries to get all of this together.
I would say that, to your recommendation, we need to give some definitive direction to Mr. Albro and Mr. Troop so they could begin to build that budget book, because again, it is over 200 pages, it's a lot of details, and if we can give some direction now to begin building that book rather than dragging out another discussion of what the cuts might look like, we've at least made some progress this evening, and bring back the tax discussion at another point. So I will agree that some of it we do need to take a longer time to think about, but I think some direction this evening so that a more proactive creation of a full budget could be brought back to us sooner rather than later. Councilmember Mosby, and then I'll return to each of you that have already spoken.
I mean, I'm willing to try to work out a hybrid between option 2 and 3 to try to get some numbers figured out now. I mean, if people still want to talk, I mean, it would probably be appropriate if we come back in a week. Is that
Right.
something?
As a workshop, it'd have to be
As a workshop, right, come back in a week for a workshop, because I respect that more discussion wins, but I think we should eliminate it, or limit this, so we didn't go back through all this again. Workshop is based on option 2 or 3, and to limit discussion to the most part so that people can have time to go meet with staff on looking at option 2 or option 3, since I think we just got this last night. So I think that would be appropriate. It just kind of reduced down, I think you kind of almost made it as a motion, didn't you, Councilmember Starbuck?
A suggestion.
A suggestion, well, Yeah, I will enhance it as a motion that we give that time to come back with another workshop next week in using, and trying to get more narrowed down with an option 2, option 3 hybrid to move towards a budgets that they can work with. So I guess that would be my motion if there was a...
Prior to receiving a second, I'd like to allow Councilmember Cordova to contribute to the conversation.
I've started to come to a conclusion that I don't think I'm going to see the information that I've asked for since I got in this seat. I realize that there's a lot of background information that some of my, council members have had in years past, but some of the simple stuff that I asked for a organizational chart with a breakdown of positions and wages to try and determine for me as a business person and as an employer to understand, if I didn't necessarily want to consider just cuts in the essential public safety, where else could I potentially look? I haven't been given that. So I do feel that in this conversation, we started off telling fire that there is no intention, to cut their department, and yet option 2 eliminates $1.3 million just for fire alone. So again, I feel that this conversation, although I do agree that there has to be a level of cuts for us to move forward, and I do agree that the public should have their opportunity to vote, what I'm not seeing and what I'm not hearing is ever a plan or a vision on how we're going to move forward. We can cut for 2 years, and we will be in this situation 2 years from now again. We are not in any way considering the future, and we're saying let's cut because we can continue to survive. But the cost of living in California continues to go up. Wages in California continue to go up. And what I'm not seeing is any kind of plan that says we are going to invest, not just in our public safety, that's a necessity, that's an essential. If we're saying that we don't want to tax our residents 1% because we feel that they can't afford it, and here's the thing, we're also ruining or cutting their quality of life by eliminating the services that they need as being, low income, if that's the way we want to refer to them. I hate to refer to Lompoc as a low-income community. I'd rather say that we are a working-class community because that's what I feel that we are. Until we understand economic development as a whole and we start to build a plan for the future of Lompoc, we are never going to see a change, and we will be here 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I would like to see us be able to grow in economic development. I would like to see a capital improvement plan. We can cut today, but guess what? That deferred maintenance in all of our parks, all of our buildings, all of our infrastructure, there is no infrastructure. There is no plan for the future, so there is no infrastructure. That's never going to happen because every time we come to these hard choices in life, we are going to say our community, can't afford it, so we have to cut. Well, at some point in time, just cutting is not going to be enough. And I do apologize that maybe that's not in line with the rest of my council, but I am looking at the quality of life of our residents, and I don't feel that just cutting services is in the best interest of this community.
Councilmember Vega. Again, there's no clapping, and there's no cheering, and there's no booing. So thank you for the support, but please refrain. Councilmember Vega.
And I'm in the middle of one of your motions. Hope it's okay that we can kind of keep speaking. I know you're looking for a second on your motion. But I'd like to, let's just be frank here. Let's just go and just lay it out. I think all the council people, we don't like the way this has been presented because of the fact that we were asking for a balanced budget before we voted for a tax. The unfunded liability is really, really big. We know that, okay? There's just no way we can buy our way out of it. That wasn't anyone's fault here. And the public safety aspect of it, I think, is really important to our business community, and the fact that we have to sell Lompoc as a business-friendly community, which is basically what we're up against. So we can't walk the walk without walking the walk. Does that make sense? We just can't do it. We can sell somebody something, we can bring somebody here, but they're going to leave with disappointment if they've been led to believe that there's more happening here than not. I think that our infrastructure, I think, needs shoring up. So, again, I'm going to bring this up at the council, but again, I wanted to mention that, and Mr. Mosby, I wanted to...
If I could just get back to my motion that I made and enhance it with another component, and that would be to...
If you would let me make sure Councilmember Vega is done with his presentation and turn his light off so that I can give you the floor, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay,
Thank you. Unless you want to continue to speak. Again...
Can he discuss with me?
No. The discussion needs to be recognized and called out to the floor. An open discussion is not part of the protocol of running a meeting. Light is turned on, you speak, you ask your questions, your light goes off. If a council person would like to respond to your questions, then they turn their light on and they're recognized. That is the controlled flow of a properly run meeting. And that is all I'm trying to do, is be respectful of the community and those that are taking the notes and creating the record of what happened so that it is all properly done. So, Councilmember Vega, are you done with the floor for the moment?
You know, I'd like to maybe at least finish my thought so that we can see where we're going here. Allowing the people to vote for the 1 cent tax, I think it's really a frivolous fight. I think that's an easy way to go, to allow people to vote. I'm just not in favor of any kind of general tax because it'll be spent in other ways that maybe won't be economically feasible for the community. I'd like to just throw this thought out so that we can incorporate whatever motion is on the floor and make sure that we have this discussion as far as a specific tax for a certain amount of time, pick 2 or 3 items of most important, and I would tend to say the CalPERS and the public safety, depending on the ratios. And, you know, we can't balance everything. You cannot fix everything with a 1 cent tax. People are crying over here and saying, hey, we want public safety. We don't want public safety. Do you want public safety? You want to balance the budget. We have a $1.2 million deficit. But we don't, as Councilwoman Cordova has, we don't have the plan to know what the vision is to get out of this, because economically speaking, we're not there. We've gone to the economic forecast, and we are in the negative as far as population growth, as far as Santa Barbara County economic forecast. We need to learn how to build our community in a way that we can actually create revenue to buy ourselves out of the situation and make it a more sustainable community. That is my thought.
Thank you. Councilmember Mosby.
If I finish an add-on to the motion, that we bring a hybrid back of 2 and 3, gives people time, not with a sales tax measure in it, get as close as we can to the balance component. I think there's some new creative things that are on here on option 3. And adding on this motion that we bring back in August, right, that'd give time for us to get through all the components and for Dean to get a little vacation maybe. The discussion of a sales tax measure in August, but not as part of the budget component. So I think that's understood. I know it was kind of a split motion. Did we get the city clerk?
So what I heard you say was you want a hybrid of option 2 and 3 that was presented by Dean Albro without a sales tax to be brought back at a different workshop. And then in August of 2019, a council discussion and possible action for a sales tax measure on a future ballot.
Yes.
I'll give you a second.
Councilmember Vega has given you a second. Any discussion? So I disagree with putting off the discussion. This happened the last time. We agreed to cuts. We let you drive a conversation of we could solve the problem and cut, and no problem, we're not going to talk about taxes. We barely talked about cannabis taxes only because I believe there was an election. So I do not agree with delaying the discussion. I believe that we could have the discussion the same evening about what that cut budget looks like. where the deficit exists and follow it with a discussion regarding what the budget measure would look like for a sales tax. So my substitute motion is that we have a special workshop, discuss what those options might be, and in the same evening actually talk about what a potential sales tax would look like. Councilmember Starbuck.
I'm going to look for a compromise. Like I say, I wasn't going to make any decisions tonight, and I don't want to get into a thing right now of when, where, who, and what. I need to talk with people and staff. I don't want to get into a big debate about tax. I have many, many questions about it. Maybe if we could just look at the 12th of June to talk about the tax. We can do the budget this month. The 11th, I don't care, whatever day in June, but that way it would give Councilmember Mosby time, it gives us time. It's not immediate, it's not a rush, but like I say, I think all of us will need a little bit of time to look at this, see what to do. I feel it important to talk to Dean, and I don't think Dean's going to answer everything in one sitting, so.
Councilmember Cordova.
So what I'm understanding is in either scenario, we are, in the first scenario and the motion brought by Councilmember Mosby, we are looking to pass a budget without the consideration of tax, which I think is responsible. However, it does not address our major deficit with CalPERS or our major, debt with CalPERS. And so therefore, putting off a tax measure for the long-term future, I don't think is a good idea because Lompoc will still be facing financial problems. In the second scenario, what I'm hearing is possibly, coming to the table and being able to discuss the budget or discuss a budget and something in between the budget, but hand in hand, make the decision on whether we're going to go for a tax or not. Is that correct?
Correct. Okay. Councilmember Mosby.
If I could answer Councilmember Cordova, that I was talking about bringing the tax component back for discussion in August. So it was being responsible to get forward without one, so that if it didn't pass, we were still covered. But you have an option to bring it back and discuss in August there's going to be a lengthy discussion on what we need to do and how we need to do and whether it's a general or a special or the other aspects of it. But trying to get through this so that these guys can get through the book so that we can get a balanced budget passed or something close to it. And if you notice that there's an option that was put on here that's holding some general fund vacancies at the discretion of the city manager, that's another option that's been put forward to us that gives us a little bit of a ballooning process there. So, I think we can get through with my motion, but again, bringing back the tax measure at a later date, I think it'd be foolhardy again to pass a budget predicated on the passage of a tax.
I would allow for the modification of your motion if you would accept Mr. Starbuck's motion to bring it back in June. I think delaying it to August is really unfair to this community. This community wants to see the decision on a budget. Staff needs a decision on what the budget. So I could say that having a meeting dedicated to discussing what that budget looks like so we know what that deficit will end up being, because it will be a deficit. And then coming back shortly after that, but not much later than that June 12th recommendation, I could accept that.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yes.
Just for you guys to understand, if you wanted to go through with a budget with no tax in it, the amount that we have in there is held vacancies at 450,000. About the maximum we possibly can hold is $1 million. So if we were to do it now, we'd have to still find 700,000 in this scenario to cut. We're trying to do the gap of 1.5 million, and we just can't do it. We're seeing that we just can't do it. There's not enough people for us to cut or hold vacancies for. So that being said, if you're going to try and craft a scenario that's going to work, the discretion of the city manager holding vacancies, you can't get much more than $1 million, and that's the sonic boom.
Mayor, may I ask also too, maybe I'm Pollyanna thinking maybe it'll work out later on, but if in June we decide to do something, the discussion, if that's what it ends up, or August, whatever, for the tax, whenever that happens, if it's November or April or March, whatever the dates were, when that does happen, are we going to be coming back to council when we find out, again, I'll be positive and say, oh, it did pass. Are we going to come back and say, now we need to redo the budget, or are we going to continue forth until the next budget cycle? Something to think about. Don't need an answer now, but.
So what I'm hearing from you, Mr. Albro, is that currently there is near to impossible to create a balanced budget without including a potential tax measure in it. That otherwise we need to approve a deficit budget and follow up with discussion on a tax measure potentially too.
You can do it, but you're going to be cutting a lot of public safety. I mean, I'm sorry, it's 80% of the general fund budget is public safety.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. There is an adaptation to that motion if it's willing to be accepted. I still don't think we need to separate the two, but if it helps council to break it into smaller chunks and get through it, we'll break it into smaller chunks. I still think it should all be done before we approve a final budget.
And if you wanted to see what positions you would save, how much you would save, in December 8th, I went through and I tried to make every single position and how much that position burdened the general fund. So, I mean, that's a good tool. That's why I did it up front, so you guys would have that tool in front of you, so you can go through and say, what if I did away with this position, or I did away with that position? I know cuts aren't good, but it's a tool that you can use to quantitate and try and get these scenarios to work.
Thank you.
Mayor Osborne.
Yes.
I think there is a motion on the floor, but I want to be clear for myself and the city clerk what that motion is. You made a substitute motion a bit ago. I think you probably it didn't get a second. I think you're going to withdraw that motion.
I am, and
Okay.
I made a suggestion that Councilmember Mosby's motion just have the adaptation to accept Dirk Starbuck's recommendation of June 12th as a meeting for tax discussion.
Okay. And then Councilmember Mosby's motion also included a request to come back at another special budget meeting. Does Councilmember Mosby want that to be next Wednesday? Or, I'm sorry, next Wednesday?
Unfortunately, I'm out of town, required attendance at NCPA, so the meeting's the next morning at 9 a.m., so we cannot have it on Wednesday.
I can modify that motion to be a component of sometimes in the next 2 weeks. I know that finance staff needs to get moving forward, and June would probably be too late for a discussion of the budget, but give us with some...
Normally it takes almost 2 months to put the book together, because like I said, the general fund's usually the first thing we do. And then we allocate all the cost out. We want to make sure that the internal service funds are fully reimbursed from all the facilities that are using it. So we need that one component to push out all the costs so we can put the book together. And even once we do that, then we have to turn around, do the typeset and put it inside the book itself. And with the new system units that we implemented, we're already way behind. So I'm really concerned we're not going to be able to get this book together. And we could do something, to pass it and maybe have a supplemental book. But I really would rather have a nice book that you guys can reference and use in the future.
So if we gave direction tonight that supposedly say we all agreed that start with option 3, and you were able to push through a book and bring it back to us in early June, and we wanted to then go back in and add parts of option 2.
I mean, if you wanted to, I could take option 3 and make the vacancies too much that we can't handle, and we would have a book that we can work from. Does that make sense?
Yes.
In other words, like I said, there's like a sonic boom with how many vacancies we can hold. We know we can't do 1.5 million. We're seeing that in our last 2 CAFRs. We know we can probably do 1 million. That's tough. It's going to be really hard. So we could do this, and I could put basically 700,000 too much in holding vacancies, but we have to address that 700,000 eventually if we're adopting something like this. Like Mosby said, we could do something that's modified between the two.
Councilmember Vega.
Councilman Starbuck, Member Starbuck, I was a little bit unclear here that you said you had many questions for the finance manager. Were you planning on having a workshop so you could ask all those questions, or were you planning on doing that independently?
Independently.
Okay, so it's not a council meeting for you to ask all the questions, okay? I just wanted to clarify that. Also, you clarified that your book cannot be done if we don't pick one option. Is that correct?
Yeah, I really need direction, I'm sorry. I mean, in order for me to do the book, I'm getting close to the deadline.
So we could pick option 2 or 3, correct?
Absolutely.
I just think that there's a way of blending it.
You could
Is
morph
there a
them
way-
together. You could morph them together tonight. You could say, I want number 3, number
You know,
4,
I
and
think
2.
that
and I wanna
might
put 'em
be
in 3.
the prudent thing to do, to say we morph them together today, and then we have a discussion on it, and then you can actually add or pad the deal, pad your budget so that we can have that leeway to make those elastic moves.
Mhm.
Depends on what the council thinks here.
Councilmember Mosby.
So if I can get back here to some previous questions, like one the city manager made, and at any time, I believe you can bring back a budget amendment. Whether
Correct.
it's you got excess money or you don't have enough, which please, if you do, don't do like it's done in the past.
Yeah, I wish I had excess money.
Well, like, so, but for clarification of what Councilmember Starbuck was wanting on June 12th, maybe you could, because what I was looking at doing was give us a week or 10 days. We come back after a week or 10 days. You discuss with that a hybrid of option 2 or option 3, component together. We get that, so there's numbers that the finance staff can go through and we'll get a book. Then a separate component was to come back in August for a discussion, a full, intense discussion about the tax component. Not that way we have a budget that's not predicated on the passage of a tax. And I think between what we have between 2 and 3, we can get there. And I think we have time. I think you wanted time to go talk to Mr. Albro, and I don't know, that next Wednesday wasn't a date that was going to work, but if I say next week or 2, and we can work out the date after this thing, if I get a second on the motion, I guess I can call for the vote, so at least we can get moving forward with this. I don't know what the June 12th date you wanted to bring back June 12th. What were you trying to modify my motion with that?
Councilmember Starbuck.
I'm using the light etiquette.
I appreciate that.
My issue was, I know we wanted to discuss a tax, but I want to be very specific in my discussion with staff about the tax. I want to be very specific with option 2, option 3. You need to know sooner. So I'm thinking that a little special meeting right off the bat, and by then I'll have my answers to the tax. So if we wanted to do something in 10 days or whatever's available to the rest of council, I would be fine with that. August, is a long time out. I'd like to get this kind of buried in the sense of we'll have the budget, but at the same time, it'll be fresh for me. June 12th was just thrown out there as a discussion.
So I could do the meeting next Monday on the 19th if that gives you enough time to get some questions answered. So that would give staff more time because the Monday the 19th, next Monday.
Mayor, that's actually the 20th, actually.
20th, sorry, I'm looking at,
I'm actually going to a GFOA conference to make better financial statements.
well, we
I'm
appreciate
going to
it.
take work with me, so no worries.
So we're going to have you
I won't be here
teleskype in?
Monday. I won't be here Monday and Tuesday next week. I
Okay.
apologize.
All right, I could do it. I could rush back on the 23rd and get here in time. The NCPA meeting is usually done by noon, so I could make it back, literally slide into the parking lot in time to make a Thursday evening meeting. I'm just trying to get you your information sooner rather than later.
So real quick, Councilmember Starbuck wanted to meet with us, which is great, and I've asked everybody to do that. Would we have any other council members wanting to come in and meet? Because we'll have to see and schedule that. I'm just throwing it out there. If you don't want to, that's fine. It's going to be a little tough to do it this I'm just looking at the calendar here. Today's the Wednesday, that gives us 2 days. Dean's out the 2021.
So would the 28th give you enough time? It'd be right after the Memorial Day holiday?
I think I'd be more happy with that. I think.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So the discussion's on the floor to potentially have a special meeting on the 28th to discuss budget options 2 and 3. Currently, there's an option to discuss taxation at a later date. 2 dates have been thrown out, also been suggested to do it at that. So we need clarity on that second component, but I'm good with the first half of that motion. Councilmember Mosby.
And I'd be willing to split it. You wanted June, I said August, come back in July.
I'll tell you what, I'll support the 28th, and at that point, if we are going to need to have another meeting, I will go with whatever at that point. I may be ready to discuss the tax aspect of it, but I really want to discuss some of these other things that were brought up tonight.
And then I'll modify my motion to just be the one half of the component, not talking about the second level.
Okay.
So we can just get us to a next meeting.
All right. Councilmember Vega, do you accept that motion? Adoption?
Yes, yes, I do.
Thank you. Given that this discussion will continue, I know many of you would like to make public comment. If you feel that it is an absolute demand to make public comment, please stay, and you will be able to do it after we take this vote. Is there any additional discussion this evening on this before we take a vote? Seeing none, let's vote. All right, so we will be having a special budget discussion regarding options 2 and 3 on Tuesday the 28th here at City Hall at 6:30 p.m. Hopefully, we will get to the point where we can give direction to staff as well as bring back discussion on what a tax measure might look like in order to actually solve the problem long term. Stacy, any written communications?
Nothing.
Thank you. All right, so we have oral communication. It's 2 minutes. If you wish to speak, you are more than welcome, and we are here to listen. Please walk right up and begin.
Wow. Mayor and city members, council members, if it takes all this time for a discussion of a 1%, maybe we should be asking for 2%. And when I heard that other cities got 64% of the public to approve sales tax increases, I think we should think that too. If you truly, I wrote this out, if you truly care for Lompoc and don't want it to fade into the sunset, you will give us, the public, the choice of voting for a 1% sales tax increase. Since the last Tuesday meeting regarding the sales tax discussion, where we heard of our city, yes, our city needs, and also last week the Lompoc Fire Department lost a grant which was much needed as the present fire station needs repairs. As it now stands, it might not withstand an earthquake of a strong magnitude. In case you are unaware, we live in a democracy where the people are heard, and if they feel the city is understaffed, has been cutting back, and doing without services, then let's all work together and put the 1% sales tax on the next ballot and bring Lompoc to the level where we all will feel safe again. At 92 years old, a farmer business owner for 17 years, a resident for 39 years, a farmer ambassador for the Chamber of Commerce for over 12 years. My place here is paradise. Please don't destroy it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a very brief comment to make about tonight's proceedings. Some members of the City Council are very concerned about respect. I would propose that the council respect the citizens of Lompoc, and let us make our own decisions about whether we can afford a 1% sales tax or not. Don't take that possibility out of our hands. Let us get this on the ballot and vote for it.
Hey, Charlie Martinez, Vandenberg Fire Department, Local F-116, IFF, CPF. Look, you got somebody over here that brought up some information for you on tax, and all you guys have is a bunch of questions. I don't think some of you guys, you're going to have a bunch of questions no matter what. Now, if you want to find out how it works with these cities, go there and ask them, talk to them, make the phone calls, do the work, because the tax is passed. It's shown favorable results. And the people are not stopping the tax, so something's obviously working. So instead of having a bunch of little questions, go down there and why don't you go and ask them. Talk to them about that type of stuff. You're drowning in an ocean. To Congressperson Corova's point, you're drowning in an ocean. You're talking about Beverly Hills and all what kind of money they have. And so it's like you being in that ocean saying, hey, he's got a life raft, he's got a life ring, all we got is these floaties. You're still going to drown if you don't need it. So use it for now. It works till you can figure something else out. We talked about, you asked how much is it going to cost the taxpayers and the people on Fix-It. If you'd have paid attention a couple of weeks ago, they talked about $123 a year per household. 25% on the citizens, 75% will be on people who like come and drink our wine, have our restaurants, from tourism. That's $10.25 a month. I told you guys that. Okay, a couple Happy Meals, a couple lattes, a couple pints, that's how much it's going to cost out of us. I think we could easily afford that. You talk about disrespect. Let's talk about playing with words. I didn't say you're going to cut positions. That's exactly what you're saying when you're going to cut positions. The Department of 28, you're going to cut positions. That's how it is. You can play with all the words you want to say. I didn't say that. You know that's what it is. We're intelligent people. Mission statement of the fire department says, meet the needs of the public. The city needs to meet the needs of those who serve and sacrifice for you. It goes both ways. Staffing, council, any one of you guys are not here today, city will still run. You go on a fire call or you go on a law enforcement call and you're one less officer. Believe me, 2 minutes ain't got enough time for what I got to say.
Thank you.
I'll finish this up.
Good evening. My name is Ron Fink, and I live in the city of Lompoc. At the beginning of this meeting, you said you weren't going to cut public safety, and yet the options that you voted to consider, both of them cut public safety, specifically the fire department, by $1.3 million. Take a look at the line items. One example that you might want to think about is a nationwide metric that fire departments respond to 90% of emergency medical service calls within 60 seconds. In fiscal year 2018, the fire department could only achieve this goal 56% of the time. That's before you cut $1.3 million from their budget. Think about that. All right, you're going to come back and discuss this on May 28th. Mr. Albro told you it's going to take him 60 days to prepare the budget book. When you come back on May the 28th, you better have a continuing resolution ready to continue the current budget until he can finish the new budget. You're behind. You're not going to make the June 30th deadline. I could support this talk about the 1% tax in June or May or whenever you're going to do it if I was confident that a tax measure would meet the ballot. But considering all the fake facts and objections that have been thrown out by some council members, I don't have any confidence at all that you'll vote to put a tax measure on the ballot. One cut you haven't discussed is the council's monthly stipend, medical benefits, and retirement benefits. You volunteered for this job. I'd suggest that since several people volunteer for a number of city positions for free, you might want to consider doing the same thing. Maybe that'd save your budget.
Thank you.
Good evening, Louis Farah, Lompoc Firefighters Association Executive Board. Like Mr. Fink said, we opened the meeting by saying, oh, we're not cutting public safety. And the inference has been from the beginning that 80% of the general fund is public safety. So it's impossible to do without those cuts. And now we talk about, well, let's examine options 2 and 3, and that guts your fire department. That is the truth to it. We're always given numbers on what it would be to eliminate certain steps and certain things from our contract. These are agreed to by the council. These are our contract negotiated items. We show that F-step was $188,000, but the actual number on that is $57,000 in 19 and 20, and $20,000 in year 2021. The optional scope pay, which is it's an additional training for our EMTs. Only 10 people in the department have that certification. We showed a $67,000 on a slide, but the true cost is $24,000 a year. We receive a lot of money from sending our firefighters out of town on assignments. We get money from our paramedic transport provider, American Medical Response. Because it's all general fund money, we're never shown the offsets of the money we bring in to the money the city pays for your department. So we see these massive overtime costs, but a lot of that comes from our employees just taking vacation days, which we're entitled to, and then our fire engines going out of town and making the city money, which then gets reimbursed and offsets. But all we see is this grandiose number of $700,000 for overtime, but we don't see we got reimbursed $400,000 of it. When you cut overtime, it means that we have to cut our rescue to then augment our only 2 fire engines. So when we lose the rescue, we lose a major component of our department and the Lompoc Valley. There's only 3 fire engines and 1 or 2 from the base from Orca to Buellton. So these cuts do come with drastic repercussions for the fire department.
Thank you.
Good evening, council, citizens. My name is Richard Smith. I'm a longtime resident, born and raised here, a business owner. One of the first things I wanted to commend some of the council members up here on is regards to just trying to get a budget, a baseline for us to look at, instead of having the financials muddied by proposed tax measures that aren't approved yet. I'm all for supporting fire and public safety, police officers. We need to fund that. I mean, we have gang problems in town that are out of control. They're the same areas that were the same problems when I was a kid growing up here. It's beyond me that we still haven't fixed that issue. The other thing is our population has been stagnant since the 2000s, and yet our costs continue to increase. What is going on? Like, we're not adding people to the town, yet it's more expensive to run our town. I know CalPERS is a big component of that, and so if we are going to move forward with a tax measure, it really needs to be a special tax, because I, for one, do not have confidence that the money that I'll be paying with the cannabis taxes that I collect with my 3 businesses I have no idea what that money's going to do. It's going to go to the general fund, and then I'm hoping it's going to fund police and fire. As an example, I project I'll bring in $120,000 a year when all 3 of my businesses are open. Where are these numbers? Where are the cannabis sales tax numbers and distribution and manufacturing numbers of this budget? I haven't seen anything. There was one reference by Mayor Osborne about the cannabis taxes not being discussed last year. Where are those numbers and the projections? I mean, we're betting on some of those funds to help our town, and yet I don't see it here. Once again, I'd ask for transparency. I want to see that information. We already passed the tax last year, and nobody's talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doreen Fabing, City of Lompoc resident all my life. I'm still understanding. I don't like tax either, but I see the need. This has been going on for a while. Our city has been in a deficit. We can't wait. We need to do something to bring revenue in, and the tax, unfortunately, is the best way. That's the only way I can see it, because then you're going to free up the money that needs to go for CalPERS in the general fund. Then the tax money needs to come in with for our public safety and our parks. Our parks are in dire need. Our soccer fields are disastrous out there. Our board does the best that we can out there to do everything ourselves out there, but the tax is just totally needed right now because it's just, there's no other way. I don't see any other way. Thank you, and I just hope that you'll really consider letting us vote and make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adam Rule. I'm not here to talk about the budget or anything, or the taxes. I'd just like to say that as a community, one thing that we have lost is our civic pride. I don't see anyone take pride in being from Lompoc anymore. The parks look like terrible. There's gopher holes everywhere. I mean, I've been riding a skateboard around town, and the roads are terrible. You can't even go down some of them. It's a shame. I'm a fifth generation Lompocian, and it's sad. But as citizens, we shouldn't have to pay more taxes or anything. It's on us. I mean, democracy is only as good as the people leading it. You know, if you have bad people leading it, it's no better than tyranny. But that's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Good evening, council members and mayor. Thank you for all that you do. Just have a few points. And one, in just examining the situation, like he said, I won't go into budget and numbers and whatnot, but right now the quality of the parks and what's going on in our dear city is already on a decline. And if we cut, it's going to be even worse. And with that said, I just want to plead that, rather than just having, because the cuts will be affecting our city employees, and I'm not one of them, obviously, but let us as the people and the employees bear the burden together. That's what that 1% would do if it passes. So rather than just all these families being cut and leaving, why don't we bear the burden together? Secondly, I believe Councilman Cordova mentioned this, but costs are increasing, and they're going to keep increasing. And so I think it would be very logical to look in how we can increase revenue rather than just continue to decrease and cutting back. And lastly, and I kind of touched on it in the beginning, but no one likes to make a bad call, and I know all of you have the city's best interest at heart, and I thank you and appreciate you for that. But if you leave us to make this choice, whatever the consequence, whatever the blessing, let us bear that burden rather than you, because there will be a consequence, there will be a trail after this. But we whether we're city employees or whether regular city citizens or even council members, we're a team. Let's bear the burden together. Please allow us to choose and pass that 1% if it does. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Steve Bridge, I think most of you know me as a resident. Mayor, council people, citizens, we all want the best for the city. First, I'd like to state unequivocally that regardless of what's in the news or the speakers have said or are going to say, I don't believe anybody on the dais wants to impact public safety. You've all been pretty adamant about that. You've been dealt a hand, and you got to deal with it. Having said that, the desire for a tax on the ballot has become divisive in our community. And while I don't believe it'll pass, the issue has become a principal issue to many people in the minds of them. So I'm going to change my position and say let them vote. But I'd suggest the council agrees to place the 1% sales tax on the next available general election with one caveat, that all the receipts of that tax are used to retire the CalPERS unfunded liability, and that it sunsets on retirement of that debt. That would address the issue that's out of our control and allow us as a community then to focus at the issue at hand and live within our means. Regarding the budget, I believe it's incumbent for you guys to look forward. And it's not cutting people or wages, it's addressing with alternate solutions. For example, you were recently given a report from the Parks and Recs. We came up with 3 major suggestions on a way to cut cost, fully fund the parks, and actually save some money. They were hard decisions, and you may not like them, but that's what we have to start doing, is looking outside the box. The River Park, we could get with the county and have security personnel down there that are not police, just like you have security people address events, et cetera, and they can call the police when there's an issue that requires their support. But if you had those security personnel down there, they could identify as soon as somebody started trespassing. I have several other suggestions on ways you could save money, but you have to start looking outside the box and looking to the future. I know you have to balance the budget, but I think we got to look ahead too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Justin Rouget, and I'm a retired senior citizen, a resident here for 25 years. And I want to bring to your attention the fact that here we are running around in the budget for 2019, 2 years after we ran around the budget for 2017. And in the 2017 budget, we had the opportunity to bring up the sales tax. That was killed by you people on the city council. You took the money that was going to be spent to put the sales tax on the ballot and the advertisement money and put it into balancing the budget. So here we are, wasting all that money and running around 2 years later looking for money to balance the budget. And you're not going to solve the problem with the CalPERS out there by trying to nickel and dime this. You have to come up with millions of dollars. And all you're doing is running around looking in that book and trying to find nickels and dimes to balance the budget. You're not going to do it. We have a disaster here. We have an emergency. And it's going to take 5 of you to vote an emergency to put this issue on the ballot. And that will be in November of 2019, this year. To get it on a ballot this year. You need the money now. You don't need the money next year, year after that. You do need it. But you need it now. And you need millions. You don't need pennies. That's all you guys are doing. You're talking around here and running around, cut this, cut that, to save a few pennies here and there. And that's not going to solve the job. And, you killed it 2 years ago. You 3 guys sat there and killed it. And here you are fussing around with it this year when people all out here can't understand why you're doing this. It's obvious you have to pass a sales tax. And the sales tax is a sales tax. It's a lot different from a school bond. You realize that? You know the difference? And the sales tax for 10 years, and it's funds coming in directly to the city.
Thank you, Mr. Rouget. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, council members, my name is Atul Patel. I'm a local business owner. And from a personal perspective, our main concern has always been public safety. That's number one for business owners around here. And I did talk with several of the hotel owners. I want to kind of leave this on a good note, that a 1% bed tax, whether it goes on to next year's ballot or whether if there is a special tax, we would be willing to entertain that, which would bring an additional about 250 to 300,000. But unfortunately, we would want it restricted to public safety only, which is police and fire. And we've discussed this at length. I know it's not much, but it is a starting point to try to close the gap. And I think as council members, you're all very smart, intelligent people and business owners, people who operate and deal with people, that you guys can come to some sort of resolution and fairly quickly. This is not rocket science. I understand we shouldn't look at government as business, but sometimes we need to. And I think we just want to throw that out there from the hotel owners that we would entertain a 1% bed tax increase towards public safety. And the reason why is we just don't want it to go, and we know 80% of general fund is public safety, but we'd like to really see it allocated to public safety. So I just wanted to kind of give some positivity instead of everybody, just all this, I call it bickering. I'd like to see some unity come together. And I think we can do it with the 5 council members that we have here. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Atul. Seeing no one else rise, we will close oral communications and we will adjourn the Lompoc City Council to the regular meeting this coming Tuesday, May 21st at 6:30 p.m. Thank you all for being here.